I've been separated from my group. It's been a couple of hours now, I think. I'm not sure. I was trying to find my way out and I can't, but I'm gonna stay here. I don't think that I went too far. I'm not sure that I don't know the name of the cave. Our last entry point was somewhere near Tulum, Guantanamo, Mexico. If someone can notify the police or the authorities or someone can help, I'm gonna stay here. I have water and some food. I'm gonna stay here.
Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Now, for some, a walk in the wilderness can be the perfect getaway from everyday life and a chance to reconnect with Mother Nature. For others, the great outdoors can be a dangerous place, and unfortunately, is a place where many people meet their end or just mysteriously vanish. Here are cases for you to consider. Randy Rasco. On November 19, 2015, park rangers at the Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky noticed that a car had been sitting in the car park for around 2 weeks. This immediately set off warning bells, and after doing some digging for information, they discovered that the car belonged to 40-year-old Randy Rasco. As the car had been there for quite some time, the park rangers set about searching for Randy right away. But when he couldn't be found in or near the parking area, they opened an investigation and widened their search. Park rangers and investigators contacted Randy's family to see if they had spoken to him, but chillingly, they had been out of contact for a few months. According to his sister Sherry, up until May 2015, everything was normal. On a regular basis, he was doing his normal things, hunting, fishing, and kept in contact with our brother who lived close to his Bowling Green apartment. Then one day out of the blue, he packed up his belongings, quit his job, and had his mail forwarded to another address, and just left. Sherry said they filed a missing persons report after they found out he had just fled, and were worried as he had recently gotten divorced. For a month, the Rasco family waited for any news, and in June, he was found safe and sound in Washington State. Randy made it clear that he didn't want to speak to his family at that time and wanted to be alone. As painful as it was, his family respected his boundaries and assured him they would welcome him back with open arms whenever he was ready. For the next few months, it's believed that Randy traveled all around the U.S., all while maintaining his privacy and secrecy. His family didn't know that anything was wrong until the Mammoth Cave National Park Rangers contacted them to let them know that his car had been found abandoned. With this second disappearance, his family hoped that there would be a positive resolution. But sadly, Randy Rasco is still missing. Search crews, volunteers, and even the Civil Air Patrol all joined in on the search for Randy, scouring the over 53,000 acres of land in the park. Despite their best efforts and multiple searches, no sign of Randy has ever been found, and his car is the only clue we have in terms of his mysterious disappearance. Randy Rasco is described as a white male, 6 foot 2 inches tall, with black hair, hazel eyes, and a slim, athletic build. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Mammoth Cave National Park at 270-758-2180. Katherine Van Alol. 8-year-old Katherine Van Alol disappeared from Devil's Den State Park near Arkansas's Ozark National Forest when she and her family were camping. Katherine apparently was playing with her brothers when she wandered off and got lost. What makes Katherine's disappearance remarkable is she was found 6 days later. When found, she was wandering the woods and was eerily calm. University of Arkansas student Porter Chadwick was part of the search party that found Katherine. He told the Pittsburgh Press that when he found her, she walked stoically out of a cave and just said, "Here I am." Many other hikers have gotten lost in that part of the Ozarks and haven't been as lucky as Katherine. A grown woman was lost there for 17 days and died just 50 yards from the road. How did Katherine survive in the woods for 6 days? Did someone take her only to return her 6 days later? Or is there an explanation to this story that we simply can't comprehend? Either way, someone or something might just be lurking in Devil's Den. Kenny Veach. 47-year-old Kenny Veach mysteriously disappeared in the Mojave Desert in Nevada on November 14, 2014. Kenny was hiking near Area 51 and was looking for cave systems and mine shafts. Kenny has uploaded several videos to his YouTube channel under the username SnakeBitMcGee, where he describes entering a cave with an M-shaped opening. He wrote in one comment, "That ain't nothing. I'm a long-distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. Suddenly, I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." Now, these videos gained popularity following his mysterious disappearance, and in these videos, he does indeed talk about how his whole body vibrated and he felt scared upon entering this mysterious M cave. Armed with a gun and a camera this time, Kenny headed back out to the M cave on November 10th, 2014, hoping to get a better look inside. However, Kenny never returned home. Although he was a very experienced hiker and outdoorsman, Kenny rarely took a map or GPS device with him on his hikes. According to his family, on the day of his disappearance, he told them that he would only be gone for a short overnight trip, but then when he didn't return home, they immediately called the police. Police, volunteers, and search and rescue teams all scoured the area where Kenny was last known to have been, and on November 22nd, 2014, volunteers found Kenny's phone. According to those volunteers, the trail went cold soon after they located his phone, and there have been no signs of Kenny ever since. At the time of this episode, the mysterious disappearance of Kenny Veach is very much alive in true crime and paranormal circles, but it appears that we are still no closer to uncovering the truth. Devil's Hole and the tragic disappearance of two teens in 1965. Now, there's just something about a place with the name Devil in its title that piques the curiosity of some people. There are countless locations all over the world which have this particular word in their name. Not only devil either, there are many other words that symbolize or mean devil or evil or some other form of something not very good or beautiful, given, somewhat ironically, to some of the world's most breathtaking and wondrous places. Sometimes the location will have gotten its name innocently enough, such as because the geology of the place simply looks foreboding and sinister, especially under the cover of night. Much of the time, these particular places are said to be cursed, enchanted, or downright evil, and the spooky and scary landscape only lends credence to these rumors and legends. So much of the time, though, these places with this particular word in the title are associated with not just devils, demons, spirits, and other otherworldly phenomena, but with real tragedies, disappearances, deaths, maybe bizarre sounds and strange lights in the sky. Today, though, we're going to focus on one place in particular, where a mysterious tragedy struck. Devil's Hole, which is located in the aptly named Death Valley National Park in California, United States. This portion of the Mojave Desert, contained in Death Valley National Park, is the driest and hottest place in the United States. Near Badwater, in the long trench of the desert between the Panamint Range on the west and the Black Mountains on the east, is the lowest dry land in the Western Hemisphere. An amazing 282 feet below sea level. A veritable showcase of desert extremes, Death Valley National Park includes one of the largest salt pans on Earth, dramatically faulted landscapes, young volcanic craters, and massive dune fields. Today, we're going all the way back to the year 1965. Death Valley was very different from the Los Angeles of the time, where there were uprisings happening all over the place and all of it being shown live on the evening news. Death Valley, California, was in one of the least populated parts of the state at the time, and a whole different world from the more largely inhabited cities which surrounded it. On June 20th, 1965, 4 high school buddies set out to a remote desert location about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Their intent was to joy dive into a deep geothermal abyss called Devil's Hole. Sadly, two of the young men would never re-emerge from this mysterious fossil water portal. Arriving at their destination, the foursome hiked up a hot, barren hillside, which overlooked a large-scale ranching operation that would nearly erase a much smaller and nearly ancient complex called Ash Meadows within a few short years. A well-trampled trail led to the entrance of a limestone chasm that had allegedly opened a whopping 60,000 years ago, after possibly some seismic event caused the roof of the cave to collapse in on itself. The foursome of boys, which was made up of Paul Gianconteri, a 19-year-old cafeteria worker at the nearby Nevada test site, his new brother-in-law, 20-year-old David Rose, who was a Las Vegas casino parking attendant, were with their other friend, 19-year-old Bill Alter, and his younger brother Jack. Boys scrambled under a fenced enclosure posted with warning signs, and thinking they were immune to any trouble these warning signs might be posted about, they proceeded to descend the 30 or so feet down to a ledge, where the faint but flitting movement of tiny blue-gray pupfish could be observed swimming in the 8 by 60-foot pool. That is, if any of the four young men had bothered to look just a bit closer at what they were about to jump into. After suiting up with scuba tanks, masks, and dive lights, Paul, David, and Bill dove into the claustrophobic waters. The temperature was nearly indistinguishable from that of their skin. Upon entering the pool, the boys most likely disturbed the delicate algae spawning mats where the entire population of the exceedingly rare Cyprinodon diabolus continues to prosper and breed exclusively. Jack was the only one who hadn't jumped in, as he was delegated the one who would remain stationed on the ledge in case anything went wrong. Sometime after midnight, Paul failed to resurface, so David and Bill quickly redove into the waters in a vain attempt to locate their missing friend. Bill Alter frantically followed David Rose down to approximately 170 feet until David, too, disappeared into the darkness. The bodies of the brothers-in-law were never recovered. Many people believed back then, and still do believe, that these young men were inspired to go diving at night despite the dangers in this specific place because of a newspaper article from the year before, which detailed a speleological research expedition of a massive underground lake below Death Valley, led by California-based professional diver Jim Houts, who would ironically dive numerous times around the clock with military personnel and other volunteer divers in their attempt to locate the missing men for 36 whole hours until the search was eventually called off. The only traces left of the two brother-in-laws? A mask and a snorkel. There was also a flashlight tied to a ledge some 100 feet below. It seemed to signal, ineffectively, the way out of the otherworldly underwater cave system. Articles detailing the unsuccessful rescue effort were published nationwide. In the Sarasota Journal, dated June 22, 1965, Houts stated that he had previously dived in Devil's Hole around 300 times over 28 trips, further commenting, "It's beautiful in there. It goes straight down 160 feet, like a pipe, then opens into a room that is about 300 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide. The bottom of the room is about 260 feet down. Then it narrows into another tube. I dived to 315 feet. Maybe that's a record, I don't know. But at the end of the tube, it opens again into something else. We don't know what the next room is, or if it's a room at all. It's like infinity." There are some very terrifying legends from the native tribes of the area about this particular place called Devil's Hole. The Timbasha told tales of water babies who would surface and swallow a swimmer or diver whole should they stay in the pool for too long. Other legends suggested that So-Apitzi, a legendary malevolent giant who dwelled at mountain springs and caves, would snatch and devour unwary victims. Myths withstanding, Barbara Durham, an elder of the Timbisha Shoshone who shared these stories at a 2002 workshop, admitted that she and her friends enjoyed how the pupfish tickled their toes when they played in the spring. Keep in mind here that the Devil's Hole pupfish, as they are specifically named, are considered by experts to be the rarest fish found anywhere on the planet. They were even the first ever species to be classified as endangered. The fish are not important to the story at all, really, but it seemed worth mentioning in order to reinforce how very special and perhaps a bit magical this place actually is. As far as the two young men who disappeared without a trace back in this mystical and extremely dangerous underwater cave system decades ago, well, they've never been found, and neither have any clues relating to what could have possibly happened to them. As for one more bit of interesting fact that could lend a bit of credence to something a bit more sinister being afoot, as the local tribes absolutely believe, at this otherwise serene and tranquil-looking water source, it's said that Charles Manson himself spent several days at Devil's Hole, trying to figure out a way to make it safely down into the chasm, with some saying he was convinced he would never have to come back up. Allegedly, he had an obsession with the place, and was convinced that there was an underwater portal to an alternate dimension, or more specifically, a portal to the underworld, where he felt he and his family would be able to safely wait out the coming apocalypse he so famously predicted would happen that never actually did. Charles Manson's problem lay in figuring out a way to drain the hole, and it seemed like he may have been given this idea by an alleged Indian legend that resurfaced during the 1920s, contending that a subterranean sect of leather-clad humanoids lived down within an eerily yellow-green lit abode somewhere in the Mojave Desert. Could this possibly be true? Just as with the case of these poor young men, just doing what young men do and looking for a night of perhaps irresponsible but never thought to be deadly fun, we may never actually know. Hello, friends. There's something so interesting, albeit a bit macabre, about our fascination these days with death and murder. We see it all over television and the internet, and who in this community hasn't sat for hours and watched shows about serial killers who've never been caught, and movies made about unsolved disappearances and whatnot? Seems like a bad train wreck where we know we shouldn't look, but we can't help but do it anyway. On this channel, we try to respectfully cover as many of those strange and mysterious missing person cases and murders as we can, and we try to do it in depth. Sometimes, though, there just isn't enough information for us to go fully in depth or as deep into the case as we would like to, but we still feel these people and their situations and stories should be talked about and discussed as well, lest they be forgotten. Sometimes it's not a person at all, but an entity which has some strange or bizarre mystery lurking around it, where we just can't let go and need to know more. Here's a collection of some of the most mysterious deaths or unsolved disappearances that we could find. Could you or someone you know hold the clue to unlock these mysteries? Number 1, the Mary Celeste. On December 5th, 1872, the American merchant ship named the Mary Celeste was found adrift approximately 400 miles away from the Azores Islands of Portugal, located in the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. A Canadian vessel came across the drifting ship, which was still at partial sail, and stopped the ship in order to investigate what the issue was. The Mary Celeste was found to be carrying a full cargo load of casks of industrial alcohol and enough food and water to last several people a few months. While the crew's belongings were all found on and around their bunks, and only one of the lifeboats was found to be missing, the ship was completely and totally devoid of people. The ship had left New York and was headed to Italy with 10 people aboard. There were 7 members of the crew, the ship's captain, his wife, and their daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time. No sight or sign of any of them was ever found. There have been theories and rumors circulating about this case since the ship was located, but never anything factual to go by. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a story about a ship called Mary Celeste, where everyone on board had been murdered by a deranged serial killer. Unfortunately, this fictitious account by a well-known author was sometimes taken to be what actually happened. The truth of the matter is, though, no one knows what fate really befell the passengers on this ship. Many researchers speculate those aboard fled for fear of the alcohol fumes leaking from the cask, causing a possible explosion. Still others say they must have fallen victim to Moroccan pirates who, for some unknown and nonsensical reason, carried off the people but none of the cargo. Before whatever fate befell these poor 10 souls who boarded that ship that fateful December day, The Mary Celeste was associated with much death and hardship, and has been subject to rumor of bad luck and even a curse. While we may never know the truth, it's said today that perhaps the crew, with a captain who was a devout Christian and never drank alcohol, clearly and loudly stated he would never abandon his ship unless it were to be for saving lives, were all abducted by some sort of extraterrestrials. It's just as good a theory as any others at this point. What do you think? Number 2, Rodney Marx. On May 12, 2000, an Australian astrophysicist named Rodney Marx was stuck in the middle of a very dark and extremely frigid Antarctic winter. He was stationed at the Munson Scott Station, which was at the time an American scientific research base located near the South Pole. There were only 49 other people there with Rodney, and they were all basically trapped there at that location until the spring. There are no winter flights to or from the South Pole because they are extremely dangerous and far too risky. These people were working and for the most part are said to have all gotten along with one another fairly well. Rodney Marx died on that 12th of May, and what happened to him and who was involved remains a mystery. Because his body had to be frozen and kept at the base until spring when flights started again, the only thing anyone knew was that he had died of some type of mysterious illness. Once his body was flown back to New Zealand and thawed out, it was discovered he had been murdered, poisoned by methanol, and all the other 49 people there with him were suspects. Rodney had most likely consumed the toxic substance without even knowing it. The authorities eventually ruled out that he had taken his own life and also thought it highly unlikely he had drunk the substance accidentally. All the others there with him for the winter were interviewed, but of course nothing ever came from any of it, and eventually foul play was ruled out as a factor in his untimely demise. The case is sometimes called the first murder committed at the South Pole, and the events that surrounded his poisoning are said to have never been determined. So what happened to Rodney? How does someone die from methanol poisoning without being murdered, without it having been an accident, and without them having done it themselves to take their own life? This is one we also may never find the answers to. What's your opinion? Number 3, the impossible murder. In 1931 in Liverpool, there lived a lovely husband and wife named Julia and William Wallace. The couple seemed normal enough until one day in January of that same year when something happened that is so bizarre and mysterious, and which is still unsolved to this day, that has since come to be known as the impossible murder. William Wallace was an insurance salesman who had received a message one evening from someone asking him to meet them at an address on Menlove Gardens East so they could discuss policies. William was hesitant and normally wouldn't have even entertained doing business in such a way, but there was a depression at the time and he figured he would take what he could get as far as sales. On January 21st, 1931, William left his home and headed to his appointment with the mysterious man who had requested his presence, assuming that it was a lead on a sale. William tried to find the address, but after a while of searching and some other strange circumstances, found the address he had been called to simply didn't exist, and he headed home frustrated and a bit confused. William claimed that upon returning home, he found his wife murdered, bludgeoned to death in the living room. William was eventually convicted of his wife's murder, but then it was overturned on appeal. There just wasn't enough evidence. Actually, there wasn't any evidence, not really, and the case has continued to fascinate both armchair detectives, researchers, and web sleuths alike. Historical researchers have since speculated that the murder was committed by a co-worker of Wallace's, which he had fired and accused of embezzlement from the company. In 2013, a British crime writer named P.D. James said she believes that Wallace did in fact kill his wife Julia and just happened to be helped along by a coincidental prank call to Menlove Gardens East that very same night. So what do you think? This is just a quick synopsis of this one, and there's so many mysterious twists and bizarre turns in between, it's enough to make your head spin. There are literally entire books written about this one case. Number 4, Tamam Shud. Australia's most mysterious death is known as the Tamam Shud case. This title comes from a Persian word that was printed on a small scrap of paper found in the dead man's pocket. The man was found dead on a beach south of Adelaide in December of 1948. The only things found on the body were a train ticket, a few cigarettes, a comb, and that tiny scrap of paper with the Persian word. There was no identification either. Tamam Shud translates to the end from Persian to English, which really wasn't a clue in and of itself. However, this piece of paper was found to be from a very rare edition of a book of poetry called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the last two words from that book are the words Tamam Shud. Even more mysterious, when the pathologist who performed the autopsy said that he suspected that the unnamed man had died from poisoning. Somehow, and this too, how it came about is shrouded in mystery as well. The police appealed to the public and located what seemed to be the book the scrap of paper came from, which was found on the man. Inside the book, which they came across by some unknown and unnamed means, also contained a phone number. This number led them to an Australian woman who claimed she didn't know and had never met the deceased man found on the beach, and further claimed that while she had once owned a copy of the book, she had lent it to someone. Again, no specific person was named to lead to who it was she allegedly lent the book to. There was also some handwritten code throughout the book, which seemed to be a series of letters, but the code was never cracked, and it's still unknown what it all said and meant. In 2009, an author by the name of Derek Abbott, who is also a professor at the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering in Adelaide, came forth with a theory of his own and proposed the coded letters were traces of a manual encryption or decryption of a message using a one-time pad. This is said to be an espionage technique that can be based on text from a specific book. In this case, most likely it was from the same rare edition of the original book in question. Some people believe this gives weight to the theory that there was some sort of spy ring operating in Australia at the time, and that the Tamam Shud case had something to do with that. This is another case where there are just no answers at all, and the full story is one like you'll never find again or have heard before. Who was this mysterious man? What connection did he have, if any, to the equally mysterious woman? Was he murdered, or did he take his own life? What in the world did all this have to do with that rare edition of the Book of Poetry? Sometimes cases come along where there just are no definitive answers. Usually we can live with that because when we follow the facts and evidence, it leads to some sort of reasonable conclusion. Then there are cases like the ones above, where there are not only any rational answers or any factual evidence, there are also no reasonable conclusions that can be drawn, and we are all left frustrated and scratching our heads until we move on to the next one.
He flat out told us, "Mom, she's dead, she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps and I was like, oh my gosh. He was just in our car and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow.
While Victoria Gorba and her family stopped for lunch, her son Caden began talking to someone.
And my husband and I kind of looked at each other like, what? And he goes, yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt. And I got goosebumps. He says, she needs our help, but she's dead. And she's laying face down with her legs up. And she can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her.
Jake and Victoria checked out the meadow, but saw nothing.
He kept saying, trust me, Mom. And I was like, I trust you, bud. You know, I believe you 100%.
Spooked, the couple decided to end the trip early and head home.
And we put it on Facebook, seeing if anybody knew anything about the area. And come to find out that there was a lady missing with the description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were.
Sandra Hughes had gone missing in July of 2020. Caden had described her in detail and recognized her in 3 of 4 photos.
He was very adamant that we needed to help her. And he described down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom.
And the sheriff said
that's the exact description of her when she went missing.
Hello, friends. We recently learned of what may be one of the strangest updates to a missing person case that we've ever brought forth. Now, sometimes in these missing person cases that we cover, there will be a little bit of a paranormal or supernatural element. It's usually something small and not very significant to the overall case. But sometimes it seems that the unknown can play a larger part in these cases. Stories of UFOs, the Fae, Bigfoot, or other cryptids portals, translucent entities, etc. But is it possible that the ghost of a missing woman may be trying to help solve her disappearance, or at least help locate her remains? We ask that you keep an open mind and consider the following case. Back in episode number 7 of our 10 Unsolved National Park Disappearances series, we brought you the story of Sandra Hughes. To recap, 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes of California was last heard from on June 26, 2020. Sandra had embarked on a solo camping trip in the Sierra south of Yosemite to escape from the current pandemic. Sandra had recently moved from Maui, Hawaii to California in June of 2020. She had trained to be a park ranger in college and was experienced in the outdoors. On July 5th of that year, the Madera County Sheriff's Office asked for the public's help in locating Sandra after they found her campsite near the Johnson's Meadow section of the forest in disarray. On that same day, the authorities located Hughes' silver Saab in Chiquito Creek to the north of the campsite. They said it appeared to have crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour before rolling into the ravine. Hikers reported seeing Sandra on July 4th, 2020, and said she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. They offered to help her, but she declined medical assistance. Officers and volunteer search and rescue teams from more than half a dozen other sheriff's departments, together with dog teams, the California Highway Patrol, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, combed the forest on foot, while helicopters from California Air National Guard did an aerial search. The search focused around the area where her car was found, but there was no sign of Sandra. Then on August 9th, 2020, two hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree along Road 5S01 near Beasore Road. She did not wave them down, attempt contact, or appear to be in any distress. Upon returning, they recognized her from a missing persons flyer and contacted park rangers. The hunters said that she appears to be visibly thinner than her last known photos. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra was a 54-year-old white female with blue shoulder-length hair. Her natural color is brown. She has brown eyes, is approximately 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs about 150 pounds. The search for Sandra was ongoing but limited. Now, flash forward to almost exactly 1 year later. This strange update to the case comes from the Madera County Sheriff's Office in Madera, California. It seems that a family from nearby Coarse Gold, California, experienced a bizarre broad daylight ghost sighting in the Madera County mountains on Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. The event was so strange and disturbing that the Madera County Sheriff's Office felt the need to further investigate. It seems that a man named Jake Gorba, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children decided to take their four-wheeler up to the Shut-Eye Peak on that fateful Wednesday. While on this family outing, they stopped to have something to eat beside the trail, and that's when things started to get strange. The couple's 3-year-old son, Caden, suddenly began animatedly talking to someone nearby. He was just in our four-wheeler, and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow, said his mom, Victoria. The normally reserved and somewhat quiet Caden excitedly told his parents that there in the meadow by where the family was having lunch was a woman lying face down with her legs straight up in the air. Furthermore, Caden stated that the woman was unable to speak or move and needed help. He began pleading with his parents to help this poor woman. He flat out told us, "Mom, she's already dead, but she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps. I was like, "Oh my gosh," Victoria said. He goes, "Yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair." And I got goosebumps, said Victoria. He says, "She needs our help, but she's dead and she's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, in order to calm young Caden down, Jake and Victoria walked over and checked out the meadow, but saw absolutely nothing. Caden continued to insist. He kept saying, trust me, Mom." And I was like, "I trust you. I trust you. I believe you 100%, said Victoria. Whatever young Caden was experiencing so unnerved and spooked the rest of the family that the other members of the family all unanimously agreed it's time to put an early end to their day of adventure and make the 35-mile drive back home to Corscoll. After arriving home, the event still fresh in her mind, Victoria decided to post about the weird encounter on her Facebook profile. We put it on Facebook to see if anybody knew anything about this area, and come to find out, there was a lady missing with a description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were, said Victoria. Now, viewers of this channel know from our previous episode number 7, Sandra Hughes had gone missing in that area in June of 2020. The encounter became even more chilling when, according to Victoria, 3-year-old Caden's highly detailed description of the woman he had seen in the meadow was identical to the description of Sandra Hughes as given by the local authorities. He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described her down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom. That's the exact description of her when she went missing, said Victoria. Then Victoria went and searched online for Sandra Hughes and found some photographs that had been released as a part of the search effort the year prior. Victoria said she got goosebumps when Caden readily recognized 3 of the photos of Sandra, identifying her as the woman he had seen in the field. As fate would have it, Madera County Sheriff Corporal Chris Williams just happened to see the Facebook post and found it intriguing, to say the least. So much so that he contacted Caden's family to further investigate the chilling account. Victoria said the corporal in charge of her case actually reached out to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, we want more information and we want to bring you guys back up there and see if you could point us in the right direction." Corporal Williams has been investigating the disappearance of Sandra Hughes since the beginning of the investigation. On the following Thursday, 2 Madera County Sheriff's deputies ventured back up to the meadow to investigate, with Jake and Caden coming along to point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, the deputies found nothing new by way of evidence, although the case remains open. If she was possibly a ghost looking for some help, I hope that he could have at least helped and maybe helped the family find her, because it's been a long time apparently since she's been gone, Victoria said. The 4-wheeler that Caden and his family used while traveling in the mountains has now been nicknamed the Ghost Runner, and incidentally is also for sale. It's not believed that the spooky encounter is the reason they put the vehicle up for sale, as the family says they will continue to go adventuring in the Madera Mountains, but do admit there are a few spots now which they aren't anxious to visit again anytime soon, if at all. Local news reporters in the area reached out to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who did confirm that they received a report of a possible sighting of some sort, and they did go out to the location to search for any additional leads or information. For now, the case remains open in hopes that this latest update regarding the spooky encounter may produce some new leads. Now, as strange as this new development is, it's not the first time that possibly a ghost helped solve the missing persons case. Back on February 21st, 1997, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment regarding a missing persons case from almost 3 years prior. This report told the story of 23-year-old Christine Skubish and her 3-year-old son Nick. They were driving along Highway 50 in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California when they vanished without a trace on June 6, 1994. Christine was a single mother and had recently completed paralegal training. She had plans of going to work for a prestigious law firm, and she hoped to make enough money so that she and her child's father could be married. Christine left her step-parents' home near Sacramento on June 5, 1994, on her way to Carson City, Nevada. After failing to make contact with her family after 3 days, her stepfather, Dave Stotzenbach, reported her and her son missing on June 8th. The police took the missing persons report, but there were no initial leads in the case. 5 days after Christine and Nick disappeared, however, a woman named Deborah Hoyt and her husband were driving along Highway 50 around 3 a.m. The pair were on a long overnight drive and had been joking and singing in order to keep each other awake. Suddenly, Deborah saw what appeared to be a completely naked woman lying on the side of the road. The naked woman's face was turned toward the road, and she was laying on her side with her knees slightly bent. She had one arm placed beneath her head and the other arm held over her head. The Hoyts were shocked beyond belief. They thought it must have been some sort of sick practical joke, or perhaps even a ploy to carjack them had they stopped. Deborah floored the accelerator instead and sped down Highway 50, not stopping until she arrived at the nearest phone booth, where she proceeded to call the police. In just minutes, 2 sheriff's cars were at the scene where Deborah had seen the naked woman's body. However, unable to pinpoint the exact location, the deputies reported that they saw and found nothing. The next morning, though, speculations began that the sighting had something to do with the disappearance of Christine and Nick, who were the most recently missing people from that area. Due to the insistence from the family, Deputy Rich Strasser decided to go back and have a closer look. Strasser figured that it might be easier to spot anything out of the ordinary in the daylight. Deborah had indicated that a particularly dangerous stretch of Highway 50, known as Bullion Bend, was where the incident took place. As Strasser patrolled the area, he spotted a new-looking child's tennis shoe on the side of the road. Immediately next to that spot, in the shoulder of the road, was a steep embankment. Strasser pulled over his cruiser to search the area more thoroughly, and sure enough, at the bottom of the embankment, he spotted the twisted remains of Christine's car. He checked Christine and observed that she was dead and unfortunately had been that way for quite some time. The deputy then went around to the other side to check Nick, who was curled up in a fetal position in the passenger seat. Strasser assumed the worst and was sure that Nick was also dead. However, when he touched the little boy's neck to find a pulse, it appeared that Nick took a breath. Strasser immediately radioed for an ambulance. Little Nick had been alone in the car for 5 days, yet he was somehow still clinging to life. Officials believe that sometime around 2 a.m. on June 6th, Christine must have fallen asleep at the wheel. The car veered off the road and plunged to the bottom of the ditch, striking a tree. Due to the embankment being so steep, other drivers drove right past the accident scene for days, unaware that it was just over the side of the road. It was later determined that Christine had been killed instantly on impact with a tree. 3-year-old Nick was all alone with no way out and no one to talk to. Christine's mother says that she believes that little Nick spent the time talking to his mother, unaware that she was dead. Against all odds, he survived 5 days of intense heat and 4 nights of cold, trapped within the twisted remains of the car. Doctors who examined Nick stated that he was in such bad shape that he would have most likely died within a couple of hours had he not been found when he was. The strange encounter that saved Nick's life seems to defy any rational explanation. If Deborah had not seen the naked woman lying on the side of the road, Nick would have not survived. Now, it's absolutely impossible for Christine to have been the naked woman. She was still fully clothed and wearing her seatbelt when found, and the medical examiner stated that she was most likely killed on impact. Deborah Hoyt is 100% certain that she saw a naked woman on the side of the road. Both she and Christine's family believe it was Christine's spirit who saved Nick that day. The spirit had apparently appeared in the nude in order to draw attention. Nick, years later as an adult, was interviewed on a television show, Paranormal Witness. He remembers seeing a bright light surrounding the car following the accident. To this day, he believes that his mother was watching over him following the accident and helped him to be rescued. The show also revealed that Christine's aunt had several dreams or premonitions about the accident before Christine and Nick were even reported missing. She dreamed of seeing them lying in their car in a ditch. She also saw the number 16 in the dream, which turned out to be the number for the mile marker nearest the accident site. Well, there you have it. What do you think about the apparition that little Caden observed, which she identified as Sandra Hughes, even down to the color of her hair, which was dyed blue when she went missing? Is it possible that Sandra's spirit is attempting to communicate with the living in a desire that her remains be found and her friend and loved ones have closure? It certainly appears that way. And what about the 2 other times she was spotted by hikers? Was that actually her, or was that an apparition?
Okay, and what's going on there? We lost my 2-year-old grandson that's walked in the woods back there and we can't find him. 3-year-old grandson. Okay, so who's there with them? His little sister. Are you saying his 3-year-old? Yeah, he's 3. Okay. The girls come to the house and left him there, and he's walked off somewhere, and we can't find him. Okay, but you're not there at the house now? I'm at the house, yeah. Okay, and how long ago do you know he walked in there? It's been at least 45 minutes, because we've been looking all in the woods for him. And it's behind your house? Is it directly behind your house? Yeah. Well, on the side, yeah. Is he a white, black? He's white. You know what he...
In the wild. Join me. Let's walk and see. But before we begin, please take a moment to make sure you're subscribed, notification bell is on, and also you can click join. Become a member of the channel, get some exclusive members only perks. Now, throughout this channel and across this community, we've seen many strange things that have gone on in the woods all across the world. There are times, though, when things happen that just can't be explained rationally or reasonably, despite seeming to be backed up by documentation and in some cases even factual evidence. We've discussed everything from fairies in the woods and people who have gone missing under strange and unusual circumstances, sometimes in front of witnesses. But every once in a while, we come across something so incredibly strange that it's hard to imagine it actually having happened at all. However, today we're going to discuss something unimaginably strange that is said to have happened not only once but twice. And while there are some facts and witness statements to make one think these things are really happening out there, it's still, of course, up to you to decide what you want to believe at the end of the day. One day, way back in June of 1783, a 4-year-old girl from Warren, New Hampshire named Sarah Witcher wanted to go with her parents to visit her uncle. Her uncle lived on a tall hill right behind their house, and for whatever reason, Sarah's parents didn't want her to go with them. No matter how much Sarah begged and pleaded with them, though, they refused to allow her to go, and assured her they would only be gone a short time and she would be perfectly fine in the care of her older siblings until their return. However, it turns out that they were wrong, and due to some kind of miscommunication, when her parents returned, the older siblings who were supposed to be watching little Sarah asked why she hadn't returned with them. What came next was something that would be imprinted in New Hampshire history for centuries, but also the mystery of what happened to Sarah that day so long ago will live on forever in the minds of those of us who study strange things in the woods. So let's take a look at what allegedly happened on a sunny day in June many, many years ago. When Sarah's siblings asked where she was and why she hadn't returned with their parents, obviously Sarah's mother and father were immediately panicked. They sorted through the details with their siblings, and it didn't take long for everyone to realize that no one was watching Sarah and that she had wandered off somewhere. An immediate search party, including the family and their friends and neighbors in the community, quickly turned into something much larger, when dozens of people from all over the surrounding areas descended upon Warren to help search for the lost 4-year-old. On the second day of the search, reported back to the Witchers with some frightening news. Tracks believed to belong to Sarah were found deep in the wilderness behind the home, but following directly behind hers were the tracks of a large bear. This was terrible news, and the family came to the conclusion in their heads that it was more than likely their precious little girl was deceased. Everyone involved was disheartened, but it didn't slow down the search one bit, as now they were determined to at least recover Sarah's remains. It was decided among the community of searchers that if Sarah were to be found alive after all, whoever found her would fire 3 shots from their rifle into the air. The situation was a grim one, but Sarah's parents and siblings couldn't help but keep at least some hope that Sarah would be found alive and well, despite how minuscule the odds of that happening were. Searchers continued in their efforts for days on end, refusing to leave Sarah to the elements and wildlife of the dense forest. On the 4th day of the search, an expert wilderness woodsman from nearby Portsmouth, New Hampshire, arrived and joined the now exhausted search parties who were still out looking for Sarah. It was only a few hours later that the townspeople all heard the signal, 3 shots fired into the air. Sarah had not only been found, but was apparently alive and well. But what had happened to her? And what of the bear tracks discovered following so closely behind her most of the way? The expert woodsman from Plymouth, who was still a stranger to the community and Sarah's family, was now also a hero, and he happily returned Sarah directly to her mother's arms, as the rest of the community looked on with tears of joy in their eyes and prayers of thanks on their lips. Everyone was eager to know what had happened to the little girl, and she was more than happy to oblige them with her miraculous and now legendary tale. Sarah began by explaining that when her parents wouldn't allow her to go with them to visit her uncle, she became bored and decided to wander around picking wildflowers. Somehow, while walking along, her feet had been cut and began to bleed. Suddenly, as Sarah tried to figure out what to do, as now her feet were injured and hurting, and she still needed to get back home, a bear emerged from the woods. The little girl was immediately scared, but soon realized the bear seemed more curious than menacing, and so she stood there and did nothing as the animal approached her. According to Sarah, the bear walked right up to her, licked her, in essence giving her a kiss, and then laid down right there at her feet. Sarah somehow immediately took this to mean she was to lay down and use the bear as a warm and comfortable bed for the night. The only other thing Sarah is said to have revealed was that the bear simply stayed with her, either in that one spot or in the forest in general, and didn't leave her side until rescuers finally approached to bring her back out of the woods and reunite her with her family. Sarah went on to live a normal life, marry, and have children of her own. It's said she entertained others with her curious tale for many years after. And, as with any legend, be it factual or completely made up, the miraculous story took on many extra parts throughout the centuries. Some very common additions are that the stranger who found Sarah had been following a vision of some kind. And yet, in other retellings of the story, the prayers from the townspeople and Sarah's family were so fervent and earnest that that's what actually brought Sarah back and led to her being found safe and sound. It's even sometimes said that Sarah told her parents, quote, "A great black dog had kept her safe and warm at night," end quote. Of course, these things can't possibly be proven, but aren't known to be a part of Sarah's original retelling of the story. A man named William Little went out and researched the story, and using only accounts that were allegedly eyewitnesses to the event, wrote the book History of Warren, a hamlet located along the White Hills of New Hampshire. This is one of, if not the only book that's said to tell the true story, in the words of those who were there that day, in its entirety. While there's not much to this story, it's still pretty miraculous, and some would say unbelievable. Knowing what we know, and considering everything we've learned about the missing in the woods and things many have alleged to have experienced while lost out there, this could very well have happened. After all, Sarah is not the only child to have alleged a bear or other wild animal helped protect them and keep them safe while they were scared and lost in the wilderness for days on end. How else would these small children have survived, and why or how would they even come up with such strange tales if they weren't at least partially true to begin with? Maybe Sarah's story is a bit too old for some to believe it is anything more than a local myth or urban legend. If that's the case, however, then it's completely understandable, because these things do have a way of taking on a life of their own after some time. It seems to still be happening to this day. We've discussed some more recent cases, like 2-year-old Ida Mae Curtis, who in 1955 went missing in Montana's Kootenai Forest. She was lost for 2 whole days, and the entire time the weather had been pouring rain, but she was found safe and sound, no worse for the wear. She adamantly insisted that it was a big bear that had kept her safe and that cared so well for her during the entire time she'd been gone. In even more recent years, in 2019, a 3-year-old named Casey Hathaway went missing in the wilderness near his grandmother's home in North Carolina and told a very similar story when he was rescued. Here's his story, which some say is similar to the others in that it is very nonspecific as to what he and his companion did for days in the woods together, and only gives mention to the fact that an animal, in this case also a bear, miraculously went against its very nature in order to protect and perhaps save a human child. On January 23, 2019, little Casey Hathaway was playing with a couple of his older cousins in his great-grandmother's backyard, but when the others came inside, Casey wasn't with them. His family searched for him for approximately 45 minutes, hoping to find him on their own, but when they had no luck, they called the Craven County Sheriff's Department. On the phone with the 911 dispatcher, his grandmother reported, "He was walking in the woods back there, and we can't find him. The other ones come through the house, but left him there, and he walked off somewhere, and we can't find him." The next 2 nights were filled with freezing cold temperatures, pouring rain, and heavy winds, but the search and rescue teams and volunteers, along with Casey's family, never gave up hope. The FBI, the U.S. Marine Corps, dozens of volunteers, plus search and rescue teams from across the state, came together to help find the missing toddler. 3 days after he had last been seen in the backyard, a neighbor of his grandmother was out walking her dog and heard a loud cry coming from some nearby bushes, approximately 40 yards from the road. When the neighbor went over to investigate, she found little Casey Hathaway, alive and seemingly well, except that he was crying and tangled up in some thorn bushes. The authorities and Casey's family were immediately notified, and he was rushed to the hospital where he was described as being in surprisingly good condition. Though Casey didn't have much to say about what he had done and where he had been, according to David McFadden of the Craven County Sheriff's Office, who told CNN and other news outlets who were seeking information, quote, he made a comment about having a friend while he was in the woods. His friend was a bear. In the emergency room, he started talking about what happened in the woods, and he said he had a friend that was a bear with him while he was in the woods, end quote. While Major McFadden admitted there were bears in the woods in the county, he said there was no way to prove one way or the other that one had been with Casey during the time he was missing. He went on to say that all that mattered was that there was something there to comfort the little boy throughout the ordeal. Major McFadden was also quoted as saying, "We are very pleased he had that type of comfort. There were very brutal conditions out there. The first night it dropped down to 20 degrees. The second night we had 2 inches of rain." Casey requested and is said to have absolutely devoured some of his favorite foods while at the hospital, including Cheetos and Chicken McNuggets. Aside from a few bruises, cuts, and scrapes, Casey was in good condition and was happy to be reunited with his family. While we may never really know what happened to any of these children, and at least a handful of others have claimed to have been protected and cared for by some unusual wildlife out in the woods, it definitely makes for much more than just an interesting story. In this community, sometimes it's hard to take things at face value, but there are some who believe cases like these and others, especially when it comes to small children who have no reason or incentive to lie about such things, that we need to read between the lines. Could it be that actually bears came out of the woods and went against their very nature in order to protect and rescue, at times even to care for, these little and otherwise helpless human children for days on end? Could it be there's something else at play here? And if so, what is it? What could it possibly be? And what interest does it have in human children? Some people believe that perhaps whatever the entities are, they simply appear to small children in the form of a bear due to the fact that there's so many bear in popular children's storybooks and fairy tales. This is all, of course, speculation, and we most likely will never know the real answers. But it is certainly something for us to consider and think about. One more interesting thing to be added about Sarah Whicher and her incredible tale of rescue and survival in the woods, the New Hampshire Historical Society has recently added, mainly due to requests made by first and second graders at Dublin Christian Academy, their 275th historical highway marker in honor of the little girl who was said to have been saved by a bear all those years ago. The marker is in accordance with the tale as told by Elizabeth Yates and reads in part, quote, "A local man joined the search after dreaming 3 times that Sarah would be found under a pine limb near Berry Brook, guarded by a bear. His dream proved to be true. Sarah was found, as he stated, and she told rescuers that a great black dog had kept her each night," end quote. Yet more elements added to the long and ever-evolving story of 3-year-old Sarah Whicher and her bear. Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to a brand new episode 2024. In this video, we'll take a look at hitchhikers who went missing. Join me. Let's walk and see. Now, they say the road less traveled holds the greatest mysteries. And out there, on the roughly 4.2 million miles of roads and highways throughout the USA, that couldn't be more true. Every night, as the world sleeps, the highway becomes a stage for vanishing acts. It's as if the darkness itself has an appetite, devouring hitchhikers without a trace. Let's discuss some cases in which the following individuals were offered a ride to their destination, never to be seen again. Buckle up, this is going to be a strange one. First up, we have Mitch Weiser and Bonnie Bickwit. Mitchell Weiser, age 16, also known as Mitch, and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Benita Mara Bickwit, also known as Bonnie, were reported missing after being seen hitchhiking along a highway in Narrowsburg, New York. They were heading northwest towards a town called Watkins Glen, 107 miles away. The date was Friday, July 27, 1973, and the couple were desperately attempting to hitchhike their way to the Watkins Glen Summer Jam concert. The concert was a huge affair, boasting performances by the Allman Brothers, the Grateful Dead, the band, and many other popular artists of the time. Approximately 600,000 individuals were in attendance at the concert, earning it a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records. Out of the massive crowd that numbered well over 500,000, only 2 individuals vanished without a trace: Bonnie Beckwith and Mitch Weiser. No one has seen or heard from them since they attended and participated in the event. Mitch was a resident of the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and had initially intended to go to the concert with his friend Larry Marion. However, due to Larry's mother's restrictions, Mitch asked Bonnie to join him instead. Bonnie and Mitch had been together for about a year when he decided to take time off from his summer internship at a photography studio in Coney Island to attend the event. He was determined not to miss it. He was overjoyed when Bonnie, who had been a parents' helper at Camp Wilmette during the summer in the Catskill Mountains, decided to join him. She had attended the camp as a child and cherished her time there. However, when her boss wouldn't approve her time off to go to the concert with Mitch, she quit on the spot and told him she would be back after the concert to collect her personal belongings and final paycheck. With worried expressions, Mitch's mother Shirley and his sister Susan pleaded with him to reconsider attending the concert. Both of them strongly believed it was a poor decision. Yet, he refused to change his mind and was determined to go. Shirley stepped in and offered him some money to cover his travel expenses there and back. At that moment, Mitch was already making his way out the door. It's unclear if he didn't hear or if he was purposely ignoring her, but with only $25 in his pocket, he left without a second glance and never returned. He would never step foot inside his home again. Mitch rode a bus to Narrowsburg and then hopped on another one to Camp Wilmette, where he arrived around midnight on Thursday. By this point, he was almost completely broke. He made sure to call his mother and sister to let them know he arrived safely, but also that he had very little money left. His mother and sister were understandably worried and tried once again to convince him not to go. But Mitch assured them that he would be fine and promised to see them when he returned home on Sunday. His plan was to hitchhike 150 miles northwest so he could attend the outdoor concert with Bonnie. After spending the night at their campsite, they had breakfast on Friday morning before embarking on what they thought would be an exciting adventure. A kind man in a pickup truck offered them a ride back to Narrowsburg, and they gratefully accepted before making their way to Highway 97. Using a homemade cardboard sign, they hitchhiked and asked for a ride to the concert. When the truck driver glanced back one last time, little did he know that it would be the final confirmed sighting of the 2 teenagers. As Sunday night passed without a call or appearance from Mitch as he promised, his family grew increasingly concerned. By the next day, they were filled with worry and dialed Camp Wilmette to speak with Bonnie. To their dismay, they discovered that Bonnie also did not return on Sunday, and no one had heard from her either. Susan and Sidney Weiser, Mitch's sister and father, drove all the way to Watkins Glen to search for the 2 teenagers, while Mitch's mother, Shirley, waited anxiously at home. Meanwhile, Bonnie's parents, Theodore and Ray, were unaware of their daughter's disappearance since they were vacationing in Cape Cod. Upon hearing the devastating news, they rushed to Camp Wilmette without hesitation. They reported their daughter was missing, hoping for assistance in finding her. However, their hopes were quickly dashed as the police brushed off their concerns and chalked it up to another pair of teenagers who had run away after attending a concert. Just 3 days before her disappearance, Bonnie had sent a letter to her parents. In it, she expressed her happiness at Camp Wilmette and how much she valued the freedom she had there. She also mentioned that when she returned home, she hoped her parents would give her more space to grow and travel. This last part gave them hope that perhaps she had gone on a trip and would contact them soon. After the authorities refused to help with any investigation into their missing children, both Bonnie and Mitch's parents decided to let them explore their freedom for a while. They waited patiently for school to start again, hoping their kids were just traveling on their own. However, when neither of them showed up for the first day of school, all the parents feared the worst. Described as a sweet boy with shoulder-length hair pulled back in a ponytail, tortoise-shell glasses, and hazel eyes, Mitch was known for his love of baseball, his girlfriend Bonnie, photography, and the Grateful Dead. He even named his dog Casey Jones after one of the band's classic songs. His friends admired him for being courageous and rebellious. According to his sister Susan, he was a talented and gifted individual. She kept a box filled with her brother's belongings as a memento of the brother she loved dearly but lost too soon. Among the items in the box are his old tortoiseshell glasses, his poetry, ticket stubs from the 1969 Mets World Series, trading cards from the 1964 and 65 New York World's Fair, and a large birthday card made by Mitch's friends on his 15th birthday. At just 4 feet and 11 inches, Bonnie was a petite young girl weighing around 90 pounds. She had a face full of freckles and long brown hair. Her close friends often referred to her as a free-spirited individual with a sweet disposition, sharp intellect, strong determination, and fearlessness. Music was one of her passions, and she particularly adored the Allman Brothers Band. Bonnie was a student in gifted classes, and instead of going to a traditional high school, she chose to attend the experimental John Dewey High School. That's where Mitch and Bonnie first crossed paths and bonded over their shared academic successes. With impressive GPAs and ambitious plans for the future, it seemed unlikely that they would simply vanish without a trace. To make matters more suspicious, they had secretly exchanged wedding rings, leading the police to believe that they may have deliberately disappeared together. Even after 6 weeks of no contact, the police remained doubtful and dismissed the disappearance as simple teenage runaways. Frustrated by their lack of action, the parents of both missing teenagers took matters into their own hands and launched independent investigations, tirelessly working to bring attention to the case. In 1973, despite the passionate pleas for these two distressed families, investigators from 3 different counties in New York chose to ignore their cries for help and refused to launch an official investigation. Despite assurances from the NYPD that they would inform other agencies nationwide about the missing teens, they failed to do so. As a result, the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office also neglected to open an investigation on the case. On the 25th anniversary of the disappearance of the teenagers, Bonnie's sister, Cheryl Kagan, decided to launch an investigation to finally uncover the truth behind her sister and Mitch's fate. To her dismay, she discovered that the original case files, notes from investigators, dental records, and a list of potential witnesses had all been lost by both the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office and the NYPD's Missing Persons Squad. As a result, crucial information was not entered into the FBI's National Crime Information Center. A former detective from Sullivan County named Anthony Suarez confessed that he had been assigned to the case in 1994, but never attempted to contact the original investigator or make any effort to solve the mystery of Bonnie and Mitch's disappearance. Anthony Suarez passed away in May of 2020. Now, in the year 2000, a man came forward with a remarkable tale. Unfortunately, it was never confirmed, and the man has since passed away. In summary, he claimed to have hitchhiked with Bonnie and Mitch, who were desperately trying to get home from a concert they couldn't reach. They were supposedly picked up by an orange VW bus, but the driver pulled over when things got too intense. The group stopped at the Susquehanna River for a swim, but unfortunately, both Mitch and Bonnie were swept away by the strong current. The driver left, but promised to contact the police, so the other hitchhiker saw no need to do so himself. Eventually, he did meet with investigators at his own expense, and now the police believe his story is the most likely explanation for what happened to the missing teens. Nevertheless, the families remain doubtful and are waiting to hear from the driver or any other potential witnesses. However, despite their efforts, no one has stepped forward with any information about the incident. This case remains unsolved. Next up, we have the case of JoJo Dullard. On November 9, 1995, 21-year-old JoJo Dullard left her home in Callan, County Kilkenny, to take a bus to Dublin, where she was supposed to meet up with friends. After spending the afternoon at Bruxelles Pub on Grafton Street, she planned to take the bus back home around 10 p.m. However, she missed the last bus of the night and had to board a different one that would take her somewhat close to her final destination in Naas, County Kildare. With no other plans for the evening, she hopped off that bus and began hitchhiking. This was a common occurrence at the time. After hitchhiking her first ride to Moon, JoJo called a friend from a payphone. She promised to be home soon, as someone had just pulled over and offered her a ride while she was making the call. As soon as she hung up, she presumably got into the car and was never seen or heard from again. Even though her family continuously asked for updates and assistance, the police initially refused to provide any help. They believed JoJo voluntarily disappeared and would reappear on her own eventually. During the evening when JoJo Dullard disappeared, a truck driver claimed he saw a young woman running naked through Moon. The driver and his boss were traveling through the area at the time and spotted the visibly distressed woman, but they did not stop to offer assistance. They did, however, call the police and were promised that someone would immediately go to the location and investigate. The driver claimed that he later learned the woman was not JoJo, and authorities confirmed that it was actually someone else. Now, the murder of JoJo was only recently declared by authorities, and now the police are searching for any traces of remains. The case was reopened a few years ago, and the Police Service of Ireland issued a statement to the public and JoJo's family. They now believe she was a victim of homicide and that her cause of death was most likely due to violent means. This case is filled with an extraordinary amount of information, largely due to the relentless efforts of JoJo's family, particularly her devoted sister. They have taken it upon themselves to investigate the case, feeling let down by the authorities from the get-go. Hiring investigators and following leads has become their own responsibility. Despite all their efforts, the truth behind JoJo Dullard's disappearance remains elusive, and sadly, she is not the only young woman to go missing in that area. Next, we have Jaime Herdman. At only 26 years old, Jaime Herdman was a skilled chef from Stockton, New Zealand. He had failed to work at a furniture removal company in Broome, Western Australia, when he disappeared. During his free time, Jaime poured his passion into renovating a Nissan utility van that he dreamed of taking for a cross-country trip across Australia. After completing his project and waiting for the perfect moment, Jaime finally set off on his long-awaited road trip. Jamie's family reported him missing on December 5, 2006, when they couldn't reach him during his trip. An investigation was launched, and authorities discovered that Jaime was last seen hitchhiking at Daly Waters, approximately 317 miles from Darwin, where his family believed he was headed. His van, which had a history of overheating, was quickly located abandoned near a roadhouse on Stewart Highway. Inside the unlocked van, authorities found Jamie's clothes, phone, credit cards, toothbrush, and some cash. However, his keys were missing. In November of 2006, Jaime made the unusual decision to travel through the center of Australia on his way to Daly Waters. His brother Carl described this as bizarre. Jaime was an avid fisherman, leading his family to believe that he would have more likely chosen a route along the coast. However, Carl reported that Jaime had left Broome suddenly and without informing anyone, not friends, family, or even his employer. The family suspected that Jaime may have received a warning from a friend about someone who was after him or planning to harm him in some way. Everyone held on to the hope that Jaime was simply unaware of the search efforts to find him and that he was out there, somewhere, continuing his journey and still safe. There was also the possibility that he had become stranded in a remote Aboriginal community, cut off from the rest of civilization due to severe flooding. But as more time passed, without any word from Jaime, it became increasingly unlikely that he would be found alive. Despite extensive search efforts on land and in the air, no trace of Jaime or any clues as to his whereabouts have ever been discovered. He remains missing to this day, along with many others who have traveled through the isolated Australian outback and never returned home. And finally, Joshua Jones. Joshua Jones, a 29-year-old man from Hurst Rise in Matlock, Derbyshire, England, left his home on December 12, 2020 at approximately 11:30. He told his wife, Talia, that he was going to the pharmacy and would be back soon. Before leaving, he kissed his 2-year-old son and wife goodbye, but never returned. At around noon, CCTV footage captured Joshua at a department store, and then later at a nearby Sainsbury grocery store. Witnesses reported seeing him hitchhiking on the A632 towards Chesterfield at around 4 p.m. Prior to his disappearance, Joshua had texted his wife saying, "I love you to the moon and back." This mysterious vanishing led to multiple reports to the police about potential sightings of Joshua. However, no one has been able to locate him since. When he disappeared, he'd been wearing a gray super dry jacket and blue jeans. The sleeves of the coat were light colored and the inside was green. Other identifying features include a Japanese-inspired tattoo on his right arm featuring a dragon, a koi fish, and a crane. On his left wrist, there was a tattoo in Talia's handwriting that read, "To the moon and back," with a red rocket and runes surrounding a moon inside. Despite the efforts of authorities, including drone searches, mountain rescue teams, and a helicopter, Joshua Jones could not be found nor any information about his disappearance. There are no leads or evidence in this case. His wife claimed that she wasn't surprised that he couldn't be seen on CCTV footage because there were only cameras in Central Matlock. Talia also mentioned that her and Joshua had often talked about leaving society behind and building a treehouse to live in. During the pandemic and lockdowns, Joshua struggled with feeling trapped and anxious. He refused to seek medical help, believing time would heal his wounds. Talia remains hopeful that her husband is still alive and possibly living in the wilderness, as he was skilled in survival and loved the outdoors. Now, there is no record explaining the reason that he would have had to possibly leave his wife and son behind intentionally. However, the day before he vanished, his car had broken down, and both he and Talia were concerned about the expenses of getting it fixed and how that would affect plans to purchase Christmas gifts. On top of that, rent was due, and they had yet to shop for their holiday meal. Talia speculates that the stress of their life together may have pushed him to flee. Unfortunately, there is no further information on this case, and Joshua Jones remains missing. The strange disappearance of Eric Sears. On July 14, 2004, friends and recent graduates of Carlsbad High School in California, 17-year-olds Eric Sears and Ben Foglestrom, decided to go on a camping trip together in Joshua Tree National Park. The two of them showed up to their campsite in Jumbo Rocks and were just having a good time. They were turned away from the San Jacinto due to wildfires. Around noon is when investigators believe the two boys became separated. Teams of searchers were told that Eric became dehydrated and Ben went to go and find some water. Eric stayed behind and curled up underneath a picnic bench to try and rest in the shade until Ben returned. When Ben came back, he couldn't find Eric anywhere and became panicked. Some other campers came across him, how is still unclear, and brought him into the park office to report the disappearance of Eric at around 4:40 the next afternoon. The search of a 20-square-mile area of the park began at 6 p.m. that evening. There was an intensive search and rescue operation. The park's SAR team scoured the area with help from various law enforcement teams, and as of Sunday, there were 170 searchers in total. But by Monday, the number of searchers had dropped to 40 because the volunteers had to return to work. The search included tracking dogs, horses, a helicopter, fixed-wing planes, and climbers who looked in rock crevices where he could have fallen. Robert Fonda, one of the park's lead trackers, said the search was difficult because it had taken place in 100-plus degree heat every day and because the terrain varied from really flat to boulder outcroppings where the footing is perilous. He stated, "We've been working a lot in the back areas and making sure that some teams didn't miss anything. You can't speculate about what may have happened. You just have to search." Searchers did find some of Eric's shoe prints, and the dogs were able to pick up his scent, but none of it enabled them to determine where he was going. Eric was described as in top physical condition. He ran cross-country for 4 years in high school and even traveled to Australia 2 years earlier with other state runners. As an adult, he also participated in a 24-hour relay race between Carlsbad and El Camino high schools at Carlsbad, July 10th and 11th, to promote the sport and help raise money. Unfortunately, all would not end well. Eric's body was found on July 23rd. The cause of death couldn't be determined by autopsy because that time it was too badly decomposed. There was no obvious trauma found anywhere on the body. This is when the investigators turned to the only person who was with him that night for answers. The rest of the story, as told by Ben to the authorities, is strange to say the least. Here's what Ben said had happened leading up to the disappearance, though he admitted to authorities during this statement that he was having trouble distinguishing what actually happened from hallucinations he was certain he was having due to his and Eric's partaking in a wildly grown illicit but not illegal in the state of California substance the night before. His report was oftentimes conflicting and all over the place. He told authorities both he and Eric had drank a tea made from a certain weed. He claimed he remembered speaking to a bush, an Indian, and possibly to Eric. He said he was pretty sure his friend was deceased because he thought he remembered disposing of his body. He also couldn't tell authorities exactly how Eric had gone missing or ended up deceased, depending on which story Ben was recounting at the time. However, 2 chemicals, toxins, found in this plant were found in Eric's brain tissue. One way or another, the use of this plant by Ben and Eric was a major contributing factor in Eric's death. The plant, known as Jimson weed, loco weed, stinkweed, mad apple, thorn apple, are among the street names for the foul-smelling Datura stramonium plant. It is one of a group of plants known as belladonnas. Datura stramonium is a common weed found along roadsides, in cornfields, pastures, and waste areas. It's been reported to grow widely in all but 2 states, Wyoming and Alaska. Although it's not popular on the street, it is usually used by teenagers curious about the plant's hallucinogenic and euphoric effects. Although it's something adolescents might use with their peers, all parts of the plant are toxic, and usage can result in serious illness or death. It can take up to hours for someone to feel the plant's effects, so people often consume excessive amounts believing it's not working. Since it's growing wild, the potency is impossible to predict. The toxicity even varies by year, between plants, parts of the plant, and even among different leaves on the same plant. Even just a small amount of it ingested can cause nausea, headache, severe agitation, hallucinations, behavioral changes, and/or delirium. Annually, poison control centers deal with approximately 1,000 cases of poisoning by these plants. Usage increases between May and September when the plants are mature and plentiful. The overwhelming majority of users report that their experience was very unpleasant, physically dangerous, and sometimes terrifying. Few people ever use it twice. Even a one-time usage can have tragic effects, such as in this case. With all that being said, one may ask, what is the lure to experiment with a plant which seems to have no pleasant effects whatsoever? The effects have been described as being in a living dream and can last for days. It has extremely powerful psychoactive effects, including hallucinations, delusions, disorientation, confusion, and panic. Doesn't sound like my idea of fun. Users have no concept that anything they are talking to, seeing, or running from isn't actually there. That's how intense these hallucinations can be, where it's impossible to distinguish them from reality. Oddly enough, some of the hallucinations are reported to have recurrent themes, such as insects, cigarettes, people, or objects appearing and disappearing, including demons and monsters. Smoking a phantom cigarette is one of the most common hallucinations, even if the individual has never smoked before. Talking to inanimate objects, plants, and friends who are not present is also frequently reported. Individuals lose their ability to identify their friends and may not even recognize their own reflection in a mirror. The individual may also try to interact with these hallucinations. Most users don't even realize that they're hallucinating until its effects wear off. Amnesia is also frequently reported, with users having no memory of what they were doing for several hours, or they may unconsciously replace fact with fantasy. They can fall in and out of conscious, slip into delirium. It's believed that this is what happened with Eric and Ben while they were out being typical teenagers that night in Joshua Tree. Did they get in over their heads and one thing lead to another? Did Eric die of an overdose from taking too much, thinking the initial doses weren't effective or not working for him? Or was it something else altogether? Unfortunately, Jimson weeds related deaths are often a result of impaired judgment that leads to risk-taking activities, such as believing you can fly and jumping off a cliff or chasing a mermaid in a lake, even though you can't swim. The above listed are nowhere near all the dangerous effects this particular belladonna could have on the human brain and psyche. So what happened to Eric Sears that fateful night in 2004, when he had his whole life ahead of him and was just looking to have some fun with his friend in a beautiful place, in celebration of the huge life milestone of graduating high school? Eric was described by his peers as popular and friendly, and as mentioned before, was a member of the cross-country team. He had been accepted into the engineering program at San Diego State University and was to begin classes that fall. His death affected the whole community. According to an affidavit filed at Superior Court in Indio, He provided several stories of hallucinating during the night, with he being Ben Foglestrom. The community was heartbroken with the discovery of Eric's body and with the seeming senselessness of it on top of it all. On the porch of the Sears home, signs with messages of hope, flowers, and red and white and blue candles formed what was to be a welcome for the family when they returned. Parents Tom and Wendy Sears have remained at the desert campground since shortly after their son was reported missing. Officials said the Sears family was in seclusion Friday night in nearby 29 Palms, and that their daughter, Stephanie, age 19, was en route to join them. Many were expected to return later in the evening to share prayers and light candles against the darkness at the Sears home, something they have done night after night this week. Neighbors and friends said the mutual support provided by the small, close community has at times been the only thing that carried them through more than a week of waiting. Groups of neighbors have traveled daily to Joshua Tree to help support the family. There was a search warrant issued for Ben's home in hopes of uncovering more information. According to this affidavit, investigators did give him a lie detector test, but we know that these are faulty and not admissible in most courts. This was while searchers were still looking for Eric in the Joshua Tree Park. According to the affidavit, Ben tearfully admitted during an interview with detectives that he found Eric dead inside his tent. He said that happened the day he reported his friend as missing. This is also where he admitted to disposing of Eric's body by putting it inside an outhouse toilet at their campsite. But, according to the affidavit, that's when he wanted to stop talking to investigators and then changed the story altogether. Investigators say he later denied dumping Eric's body in an outhouse and said, "That's not where I put him." Investigators did indeed check several park toilets, but searchers eventually found Eric's body lying in the middle of the desert, about 3 miles from the Jumbo Rocks campground. Sheriff's investigators tried hard to corroborate what Ben told them about what happened while they were at the campsite, before, during, and after they had consumed the plant. Whatever information was given to us in the affidavit, investigators are looking into it and looking at every scenario in the affidavit, they said. But despite statements being apparently made in this affidavit, the Sheriff's Department said he was not a suspect in the death. They did say that he is still a focus of their investigation as they try to figure out exactly how the 17-year-old ended up dead in the desert at Joshua Tree. No one was ever charged with anything in relation to the death of Eric Sears, and so much of what happened remains a mystery. To make matters worse, and even more sad, 2 San Bernardino County Sheriff's Search and Rescue volunteers on their way to help search for Eric, a 35-year-old man named Joseph Tidwell from Wonder Valley, who was allegedly under the influence of several narcotic substances, lost consciousness due to his intoxication, causing his truck to drift across the roadway directly into the path of the sheriff's van. Scott Johnson, 30, of Redlands, died at the scene. Philip Calvert, 58, of Mentone, was transported to Desert Regional Medical Center with major injuries and sadly died early the next morning. Although this harmful plant isn't scheduled under the Controlled Substances Act, 3 states, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Tennessee, at this time, have passed legislation to control it. In addition, the FDA has asserted that the belladonna alkaloids in this plant are neither safe nor effective in over-the-counter or other cough and cold inhalants. So be careful what you put into your body. Hello, friends. In this video, I'm going to take a look at Devil's Hole and the tragic disappearance of 2 teens in 1965. Now, there's just something about a place with the name Devil in its title that piques the curiosity of some people. There are countless locations all over the world which have this particular word in their name. Not only devil either, there are many other words that symbolize or mean devil or evil or some other form of something not very good or beautiful, given, somewhat ironically, to some of the world's most breathtaking and wondrous places. Sometimes the location will have gotten its name innocently enough, such as because the geology of the place simply looks foreboding and sinister, especially under the cover of night. Much of the time, these particular places are said to be cursed, enchanted, or downright evil, and the spooky and scary landscape only lends credence to these rumors and legends. So much of the time, though, these places with this particular word in the title are associated with not just devils, demons, spirits, and other otherworldly phenomena, but with real tragedies, disappearances, deaths, maybe bizarre sounds and strange lights in the sky. Today, though, we're going to focus on one place in particular, where a mysterious tragedy struck. Devil's Hole, which is located in the aptly named Death Valley National Park in California, United States. This portion of the Mojave Desert, contained in Death Valley National Park, is the driest and hottest place in the United States. Near Badwater, in the long trench of the desert between the Panamint Range on the west and the Black Mountains on the east, is the lowest dry land in the Western Hemisphere, an amazing 282 feet below sea level. A veritable showcase of desert extremes, Death Valley National Park includes one of the largest salt pans on Earth, dramatically faulted landscapes, young volcanic craters, and massive dune fields. Today, we're going all the way back to the year 1965. Death Valley was very different from the Los Angeles of the time, where there were uprisings happening all over the place and all of it being shown live on the evening news. Death Valley, California, was in one of the least populated parts of the state at the time, and a whole different world from the more largely inhabited cities which surrounded it. On June 20th, 1965, 4 high school buddies set out to a remote desert location about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Their intent was to joy dive into a deep geothermal abyss called Devil's Hole. Sadly, 2 of the young men would never re-emerge from this mysterious fossil water portal. Arriving at their destination, the foursome hiked up a hot, barren hillside, which overlooked a large-scale ranching operation that would nearly erase a much smaller and nearly ancient complex called Ash Meadows within a few short years. A well-trampled trail led to the entrance of a limestone chasm that had allegedly opened a whopping 60,000 years ago, after possibly some seismic event caused the roof of the cave to collapse in on itself. The foursome of boys, which was made up of Paul Gianconteri, a 19-year-old cafeteria worker at the nearby Nevada test site, his new brother-in-law, 20-year-old David Rose, who was a Las Vegas casino parking attendant, were with their other friend, 19-year-old Bill Alter, and his younger brother Jack. Boys scrambled under a fenced enclosure posted with warning signs, and thinking they were immune to any trouble these warning signs might be posted about, they proceeded to descend the 30 or so feet down to a ledge, where the faint but flitting movement of tiny blue-gray pupfish could be observed swimming in the 8 by 60-foot pool. That is, if any of the 4 young men had bothered to look just a bit closer at what they were about to jump into. After suiting up with scuba tanks, masks, and dive lights, Paul, David, and Bill dove into the claustrophobic waters. The temperature was nearly indistinguishable from that of their skin. Upon entering the pool, the boys most likely disturbed the delicate algae spawning mats where the entire population of the exceedingly rare Cyprinodon diabolus continues to prosper and breed exclusively. Jack was the only one who hadn't jumped in, as he was delegated the one who would remain stationed on the ledge in case anything went wrong. Sometime after midnight, Paul failed to resurface, so David and Bill quickly redove into the waters in a vain attempt to locate their missing friend. Bill Alter frantically followed David Rose down to approximately 170 feet until David, too, disappeared into the darkness. The bodies of the brothers-in-law were never recovered. Many people believed back then, and still do believe, that these young men were inspired to go diving at night despite the dangers in this specific place because of a newspaper article from the year before which detailed a speleological research expedition of a massive underground lake below Death Valley, led by California-based professional diver Jim Houts, who would ironically dive numerous times around the clock with military personnel and other volunteer divers in their attempt to locate the missing men for 36 whole hours until the search was eventually called off. The only traces left of the 2 brother-in-laws? A mask and a snorkel. There was also a flashlight tied to a ledge some 100 feet below. It seemed to signal, ineffectively, the way out of the otherworldly underwater cave system. Articles detailing the unsuccessful rescue effort were published nationwide. In the Sarasota Journal, dated June 22, 1965, Out stated that he had previously dived in Devil's Hole around 300 times over 28 trips, further commenting, "It's beautiful in there. It goes straight down 160 feet, like a pipe, then opens into a room that is about 300 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide. The bottom of the room is about 260 feet down. Then it narrows into another tube. I dived to 315 feet. Maybe that's a record, I don't know. But at the end of the tube, it opens again into something else. We don't know what the next room is, or if it's a room at all. It's like infinity." There are some very terrifying legends from the native tribes of the area about this particular place called Devil's Hole. The Timbasha told tales of water babies who would surface and swallow a swimmer or diver whole should they stay in the pool for too long. Other legends suggested that So-Apitsi, a legendary malevolent giant who dwelled at mountain springs and caves, would snatch and devour unwary victims. Myths withstanding, Barbara Durham, an elder of the Timbisha Shoshone who shared these stories at a 2002 workshop, admitted that she and her friends enjoyed how the pupfish tickled their toes when they played in the spring. Keep in mind here that the Devil's Hole pupfish, as they are specifically named, are considered by experts to be the rarest fish found anywhere on the planet. They were even the first ever species to be classified as endangered. The fish are not important to the story at all, really, but it seemed worth mentioning in order to reinforce how very special and perhaps a bit magical this place actually is. As far as the two young men who disappeared without a trace back in this mystical and extremely dangerous underwater cave system decades ago, well, they've never been found, and neither have any clues relating to what could have possibly happened to them. As for one more bit of interesting fact that could lend a bit of credence to something a bit more sinister being afoot, as the local tribes absolutely believe, at this otherwise serene and tranquil-looking water source, it's said that Charles Manson himself spent several days at Devil's Hole, trying to figure out a way to make it safely down into the chasm, with some saying he was convinced he would never have to come back up. Allegedly, he had an obsession with the place, and was convinced that there was an underwater portal to an alternate dimension, or more specifically, a portal to the underworld, where he felt he and his family would be able to safely wait out the coming apocalypse he so famously predicted would happen that never actually did. Charles Manson's problem lay in figuring out a way to drain the hole, and it seemed like he may have been given this idea by an alleged Indian legend that resurfaced during the 1920s. Contending that a subterranean sect of leather-clad humanoids lived down within an eerily yellow-green lit abode somewhere in the Mojave Desert.
It says Bill planned on leaving the park before dark, and when she still hadn't heard from him by Friday morning, she called rangers, who launched a search effort that's grown.
An incredible story of survival. A hiker survived 5 days alone out in Joshua Tree.
It all started on the last week of December in 2012. My mother and I were relaxing after work, watching TV, when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in our hallway. When I turned to look, I noticed two shadowy-like figures that appeared on our hallway wall. In disbelief of what I was seeing, I turned my head over towards my mother, and right as I did, she made eye contact with me and simply said, "You see them, don't you?" I said yes. She told me not to acknowledge them because they're entities that can sense fear, but in disbelief, I looked back over at the hallway wall, and they were gone. A few days had gone by, and my mother told me she felt a sense of dread and said someone in our family is going to pass away before the end of the year. Well, on New Year's Eve, 2012, my mother and I celebrated at home. We watched the movie Tron and had a pizza delivered to ring in the new year. I've always been a real mama's boy, so this was an ideal way for me to spend my New Year's Eve. Around 11 p.m. that night, we saw the two figures again. This time, we both experienced an overwhelming quietness and sense of urgency and dread. We both did our best to ignore it, and eventually the shadowy figures and the senses went away. We discussed the experience, and again my mother told me to never acknowledge them, and before I could press her for more details, my mother started telling me how much I meant to her and that I would go on to do great things in my life. She loved me, etc. She then got up and walked towards the kitchen, turned around and said, "I love you," then fell to the ground. I had previous EMT training and am certified in CPR, so I dialed 911 and explained to them my mother is in cardiac arrest and I needed medical assistance ASAP. I was doing CPR on my mother for nearly 20 minutes, and for anyone who's ever done CPR, it's not easy. The EMTs arrived at 11:38 p.m., and my mother was taken to the emergency room. By this time, our neighbor and friend Bonnie had rushed over to my house and drove me to the hospital. When I checked in at the front desk, I was taken to a small private room, and the head physician told me that my mother had passed away. The autopsy showed my mother suffered from a fatal heart attack, and her time of death was 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, 2012. When I was taken in to see her one last time, her lips were blue, she was cool to the touch, but she was still my mom. So I just hugged her and couldn't let go for nearly 30 minutes. Thankfully, my neighbor Bonnie was there and gave me plenty of support and encouragement to leave, as my mother would want me to stay strong. Fast forward about 6 months after my mother died, I'd quit my job and had become a recluse. I would only leave my house to purchase groceries. I quickly realized how severely depressed I was and decided it was time to get away. I ended up traveling to Joshua Tree National Park and decided it would be my getaway to find some peace and closure. I notified my neighbor Bonnie not to worry, that I'm just going on a day's hike and would be back by midnight. When I arrived at Joshua Tree, I parked my Jeep and entered the Lost Palms Oasis Trail. After a few hours of walking and hiking, I stopped to take a break and eat. As I finished up and looked around, nothing looked familiar, and I in fact was not on any trail. I was not too worried and felt confident I would find my way back, but as I made my way through the desert landscape that I did not recall ever passing, I started feeling like I was being watched. I started to panic. Then I started hearing strange growling noises, but could not determine from what direction they were coming from. It almost seemed like they were all around me. So I stood in one spot and made a 360-degree rotation. As I came to a stop, I saw something transparent, no defining shape, just a blur directly in front of me that was coming closer and closer to where I was standing. I quickly turned around and started walking faster and faster in the opposite direction, and then experienced the same overwhelming quietness and sense of urgency and dread I had experienced with my mother just 6 months prior. Then all of a sudden, almost like a snap of a finger, daytime turned into night. I wasn't sure what was going on, but knew something wasn't right. After walking around in the dark, I found myself by a large rock, about as big as a large SUV, and felt safest there. I put my back against the rock. This way I felt nothing would sneak up behind me. I used the night to hydrate and eat some snacks I brought. I remember trying to make sense out of what I was experiencing, but knew that my mother and I had already experienced something within our own home. But at least when I was home, I felt safe. Here I was vulnerable and alone. As I tried to rest that night, I started seeing a number of shadowy entities walking around in the desert, almost as if they were wandering around aimlessly. It freaked me out, and the more I acknowledged them, the closer they got to me. At one time during the night, I remember feeling something breathing down my neck. Remember, my back was against a huge rock. I just closed my eyes and did my best to keep them shut. The last thing I remember about that night was opening my eyes and seeing 3 shadowy figures, one at each side and one directly in front of me. Then once again, in a snap, it was morning. I would experience the same weirdness for 2 more days until the last day. On the last day of me roaming around Joshua Tree, I hadn't had any food or water since the initial first night. I was scared and dehydrated. I came upon another large rock and remembered in my EMT training that digging a hole near a rock in the desert will keep you cool and less likely to get severe sunburn. I did just that and thought to myself, I'm literally digging my own grave. By the time I laid down in the 2-foot arched hole I'd made and covered my chest and legs up with dirt, I blacked out. I don't remember anything for the rest of that day or night. The next morning, I was woken by an off-duty search and rescue employee who was literally making me choke on water. I remember him saying, "There are a whole lot of people out looking for you, buddy." I was picked up by helicopter and taken to Regional Medical Center in Palm Springs, California. In the days during my recovery, I saw 2 detectives, a number of psychiatrists, and my neighbor Bonnie, who was there at the hospital by my side 100% of the way. The detectives wanted to close the missing persons report my neighbor Bonnie made the second day I was missing, but they asked me strange questions like, was I using a flare gun in the area? No. And why had I purchased a large amount of camping gear and survival materials prior to my hike? I'm going for a hike. Strange questions to ask someone, or maybe it's just me. The physician stated he thought I was planning to kill myself due to the loss of my mother, but honestly, that never crossed my mind. The psychiatrist told me I didn't experience anything but hallucinations due to the lack of food and water and effects of dehydration. My neighbor Bonnie overheard my story and later confided in me that she too experienced similar shadowy figures when she hiked in Joshua Tree. When I arrived back home, she used sage and other New Age methods to rid my house of whatever darkness was there. However, it continued all the way up until my move to Tennessee in 2014. By far the most aggressive was the transparent entities that were in Joshua Tree. I felt like everything was about to end when I encountered them. I've always wondered if my mother experienced more than what happened that night. I'm not sure what the hell happened those few days in Joshua Tree National Park, but from what I can remember, during the moments when daytime would turn into night in a snap, I felt like I was falling down or being suspended in midair before completely realizing what was going on. I also remember a strong urge to go to Joshua Tree. I would think about going all the time, and when I finally went, I almost felt like I was being called there by something. My sister often talks about my first week living in Tennessee. She said that she felt like a demon was attached to me. One night as I slept on her couch, I woke up with her putting holy water on my head and saying a prayer over me. But I don't believe in all that. I used to. But nowadays, I have an easier time believing in alien abductions and portals rather than being followed around by a demon. But then again, who knows, right? Finally, I can tell you with 100% honesty, I experienced all the above. I can't explain what it or what they were, but I can tell you I feel like my life was spared for some strange reason. Perhaps I didn't meet the requirements for whatever it is they need. Looking back now, I would never have gone hiking alone. But again, I remember this irresistible urge to go to Joshua Tree, and would frequently feel like I was being called there.
Hiking tragedy on one of our most popular mountain peaks.
A woman from out of state dying after trying to hike Camelback Mountain. Fire officials say she became overheated on the Echo Canyon Trail, but instead of waiting for rescue crews, she went to find help herself. Then a deadly discovery. Her body later found near the mountain right outside a home.
A woman found dead near Camelback Mountain was hiking with a Phoenix cop, and tonight we know the woman's name is Angela Traumante, a 31-year-old visiting from Boston. She was found dead Friday after separating from that cop to turn back down the mountain in the summer heat.
And she thought because he was a police officer, she was safe, and she wasn't. I sent him the address where it was. It took them 3 hours to find her. And when I talked to Dario that night and asked him, when was the last time you saw my daughter? He said 6 hours ago. So nonchalant. The police may not be investigating this, but I won't stop. I will not stop. There is something missing that I, as a mother, cannot put my finger on.
Hello, friends. Today, we're going to bring you a strange story about a first date hike that resulted in a young woman's death. 31-year-old Angela Traumante was visiting Phoenix, Arizona for the first time when she and a local police officer named Dario Dizdar decided to go on a hike for their first date. The couple went to Echo Canyon Trail near Scottsdale, Arizona. Echo Canyon Trail is a 2.5-mile, heavily trafficked out-and-back trail that offers scenic views and beautiful landscapes. The trail is rated as difficult, but Angela and Dario weren't concerned, as it was later reported that Dario was extremely familiar with the mountain and hiked that exact trail often. According to reports, they started hiking together around 10 a.m. with no water, but split up. Dario, an off-duty police officer, stated that he was a local and did this hike all the time, and that she was going to go as far as she could and turn around, according to an incident report filed by an unnamed park ranger. Now, according to what Dario told the authorities, he and Angela were going for a day hike together for their first date on July 30th. He reported that she became overheated when they were about halfway up the trail and told him she was going to head back down to the car. Dario went ahead to finish the hike, assuming he would just meet her back at the vehicle when he was done. Angela wanted him to take pictures of the view from the top of the mountain so she could share them on her social media accounts. He finished his hike, but when he got back down to the car, Angela wasn't there and wasn't anywhere in sight. Her belongings were still in the car, however, and this is when Dario's police officer instincts kicked in and he decided to report it to the authorities that his date was missing. Park ranger spoke with him on the mountain and the search commenced immediately. Search teams arrived and began looking around common areas on the mountain where people can get off the trail and get lost. More than 30 fire personnel and a police helicopter scoured the region looking for the missing woman. Initially, authorities were suspicious of Dario because they thought his initial statement was changing the more he retold what happened that day. However, it was later realized that he had been misquoted by local news media and therefore misunderstood. A Phoenix police spokesperson stated that the police department was not informed as to what the park rangers and officials had already asked Dario about the incident. Angela Traumante was originally from the Boston area and was visiting Phoenix for the first time specifically to meet and go on a date with Dario. They had met and been chatting online, mainly via Instagram. It was less than 24 hours from her arrival that Angela went missing and was then found deceased. Around 4:40 p.m., crews found Traumante unconscious near a home along the side of the mountain. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Police say no traumatic injuries were observed during the initial investigation or during the autopsy. Police say Traumante had her cell phone with her when she was found. Fire officials involved in the search stated they believed she was trying to signal to someone in the homes there near the mountain to get some help. She must have known she was in trouble, but most likely had no cell service to call anyone for help herself. At this time, there is no evidence to indicate foul play is suspected in connection with her tragic death. Police say Dario Dizdar has been granted personal time off and has been offered resources to deal with this tragedy. According to the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's website, Angela died of environmental heat exposure. Her death was ruled accidental by local and park authorities. Angela Traumante's friends set up a GoFundMe account to bring her body back to the Boston area. Angela's mother, however, isn't satisfied with the medical examiner's findings. She's looking for answers after her daughter's cause of death was ruled to be from accidental heat exposure. "I'm frustrated," said Nancy Traumante, Angela's mother. "My daughter was an Instagram person. She posted everything, thousands of photos per day, and she was always in the picture. And there's not one picture of her going up the mountain or even in Arizona," she said. "None of it makes sense." But as we said, the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office did recently list Traumante's death as accidental and as a result of heat exposure. Phoenix police had previously stated investigators didn't find anything suspicious about Traumante's death. However, Traumante's family and friends have had suspicions about the circumstances surrounding her death all along, especially since the off-duty police officer claimed he and Traumante didn't bring any water with them on a hike in the middle of the summer. Angela's cousin doesn't believe it. "It's difficult because we're all mourning her, but we can't fall back and be sad about the situation. We all have to fight," said Gabrielle Matuccio, Angela's cousin. Angela was found deceased in a backyard off the trail. Investigators believe she was in a desperate search for water. Speaking about traveling to Arizona to meet the officer, she was excited but nervous, said her cousin. She also made it a point to drink a whole gallon of water every day, so it's very hard to believe that she would go on a hike in Arizona where it was 104 degrees and not take any water. Autopsy reports recently released by the County Medical Examiner's Office show no major irregularities that were uncovered that would indicate Traumante's death could be tied to something other than heat exhaustion. A toxicology report did show that Traumante had traces of amphetamine in her system, although her family told 12 News she had a prescription for Adderall, which can produce high levels of amphetamine in the blood. Traumante had 350 nanograms per milliliter of amphetamine in her system at the time of death. According to the report, adults who fatally overdose on amphetamine have, on average, 9,000 nanograms per milliliter in their system. The autopsy report additionally turned up irregular, linear, dried red abrasions on Traumante's body that ranged in size between 4 and 10 centimeters. An examination of her head and neck revealed no detectable abnormalities, according to the report. The report also stated that Traumante's bone framework and soft tissues also appeared normal. Phoenix police had previously said investigators didn't find anything suspicious about Traumante's death. They further indicated no disciplinary measures will be taken against Dario because no crime has been found. Hello, friends. Today we're going to take a look at legends, disappearances, and stories of survival in Joshua Tree National Park, California. Now, Joshua Tree National Park is home to a vast and protected land located in Southern California. The area was first designated as a national monument in 1936 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and was later given national park status in 1994 when the United States Congress passed the California Desert Protection Act. The park spans more than 790,000 acres, and over half is reserved as wilderness. The park is well known for the tree that inspired its name, the Joshua Tree. Scientifically, it's known as the Yucca brevifolia and is a member of the agave family. Joshua trees grow in a wide variety of formations, from thin and sparsely placed to thick and crowded forests. According to the National Park Service, by the mid-19th century, warming the limbs of the tree as outstretched as supplication, guiding the travelers westward. Joshua Tree National Park is a meeting ground between the low-lying western reach of the Sonoran Desert and the more vegetated High Mojave Desert. The merging deserts give the park a unique landscape, with an abrupt transition between the Sonoran and Mojave ecosystems. Joshua Tree offers visitors a variety of outdoor activities, including the typical hiking, biking, camping, and horseback riding. There are large boulders throughout the park that make it a well-known rock climbing destination, and the night skies provide crystal-clear stargazing. The natural beauty of the park is a key factor in its popularity. But despite all the beauty found in Joshua Tree, inexplicable things have been known to happen here, some of which are truly horrifying. Let's look at local legends, disappearances, and survival stories from Joshua Tree National Park. First up, Desert Dungeon. In the depths of Joshua Tree National Park, there's a strange cave, which is actually an enclosure constructed around a large boulder and sealed with an iron door. There are long-enduring legends attached to this cave. Some people think perhaps it was where local farmers stored dynamite. Others theorize it was where rustlers or gold thieves kept their loot. The energy it radiates, however, is much more sinister. Darker, more disturbing legends exist, probably rooted in truth, about the cave being used to hold people captive. One story with many versions maintains that a local family had born a horribly disfigured and mentally impaired son who was huge and monstrous. The family hid him away from society by locking him up in this rock and iron desert dungeon. The father would bring him food, but the poor soul spent his days and nights a prisoner. Growing tired of this miserable existence, the disfigured man broke out of his prison and fled, leaving the iron door ajar for his father to find upon his return. Searching far and wide, the father couldn't find his son. Reports and rumors began to surface about random brutal attacks on travelers who sustained injuries like they were surrogates being punished for someone else's horrible misgivings. The legend holds that the tortured man was never caught, and he, or whatever's left of him, could still be out there today, roaming Joshua Tree, looking for unsuspecting travelers to make them atone for his father's sins. Next up, we have the Yucca Man. The first reported sighting of the Yucca Man happened in 1971, provided by a source not normally keen on believing in the otherworldly. A United States Marine was on guard duty at the base in Joshua Tree's 29 Palms. Well into his overnight shift, the Marine was keeping post as duty required when a huge and seemingly human man came out of the darkness toward him. As the burly being drew closer, the Marine caught sight of the man's excessive hair growth and his abnormally long arms, which hung well below the knees. The Marine lifted his rifle and gave an order to halt, but then the strange man lunged forward and snatched the rifle away, surprising the Marine and knocking him off stance. He was startled, but caught himself and watched as the wild man bent the metal rifle barrel in half with his bare hands. The broad-shouldered beast of a man gave a grunt and then knocked the Marine unconscious, perhaps with the butt of his own weapon. When he came to, the giant man was gone, but his disfigured gun lay next to him. Even so, the Marine couldn't move. The blow he sustained had caused a lot of damage. He lay there half conscious until the next morning, when he was found by the relief guard. Reportedly, both the CIA and the FBI were brought in to investigate, as this wasn't the only incident to be reported. There were at least 2 other sightings that same night. One report described the man as being nearly 12 feet tall, but with a smaller, unknown figure by its side. Several people also reported that their dogs had barked and acted strangely that evening. In the same year, there were reports from employees at Joshua Tree stating they had also seen the large hairy figure. In 1979, a couple on a trip to Joshua Tree said they were forced to slam on the brakes in their car one night when what they described as a large hairy man stood in the middle of the road near their condominium in Desert Hot Springs. They recalled that he just stepped from behind a yucca bush and stood in front of the car, refused to move. The couple claimed the creature's hairy chest was the size of a refrigerator and its arms were abnormally long. Sounds familiar. It had lengthy tan hair that swished back and forth as it walked away and disappeared into the night, but only after frightening them senseless. Evidence was left behind at yet more Yucca Man sightings in 1979 in Hemet, California. This beast, seen on 2 separate occasions, this being left behind 17 footprints that were said to be 1.5 feet long, spanning 6 feet apart. 2 prominent Bigfoot researchers worked the area looking for further information, but nothing more has surfaced. Skinwalkers. Stories of skinwalkers inhabiting the Joshua Tree area date back many centuries. The Native American Navajo tribe first experienced these beings several hundred years ago, calling them Yi-na-galoshi, meaning he who walks on all fours. The legend of the skinwalkers hold forth that they are actually human shapeshifters that were once shamans of the Navajo tribe. The shamans who used their gifts for evil, like hurting or cursing people, were turned into skinwalkers, able to take the form of various animals like fox, birds, or coyotes. The Navajo people tried to keep their existence from becoming known to the outside world, but over a century ago, weird and often terrifying things began happening to outsiders in Joshua Tree. So terrifying, in fact, that some Navajo people refuse to this day to speak of the skinwalkers for fear of drawing them to them. Campers, visitors, and other travelers have reported being attacked and often taunted by these beings. Some campers have claimed that when a skinwalker is near, it's like they're being drawn toward whatever the creature is mimicking. Skinwalker attacks are sometimes even deadly, with evil beings sinking their teeth into human flesh and ripping people apart. Those who live to tell the tale of a skinwalker attack are never the same, and they always carry scars, both of the physical and psychological varieties. Next, let's look at some strange disappearances from Joshua Tree National Park. Paul Miller, 51 years old, disappeared on July 13, 2018 in Joshua Tree National Park. He was on vacation with his wife Stephanie at the time of his disappearance. They were traveling in celebration of their 26th wedding anniversary. Backwoods camping, hiking, and kayaking were typical pastimes for the couple. They were in great shape and loved the outdoors. Paul last spoke with his wife when he told her that he was going out for one last hike in the park. He planned on hiking the popular 49 Palms Oasis Trail before they were to begin their journey back to Ontario, Canada. He left their hotel room around 9 a.m. that morning and drove to the trailhead. When Paul didn't return by the hotel checkout time, Stephanie became worried. Around noon, she contacted park officials and a search and rescue mission was launched. Paul's rental car was found where he parked at the trailhead, but he wasn't with it. Rangers hiked the trail looking for him, but to no avail. Paul also didn't have a cell phone on him, but this was not out of the ordinary. The search for Paul continued for 5 days, with not so much as a trace of evidence surfacing aside from his rental car. The search included over 600 volunteers, multiple agencies, canines, high-tech equipment, and lots of hope, but nothing was found. Park Superintendent David Smith said, "We have a witness who saw Paul at the trailhead that morning, but that's all." Another visitor from England that was at the park that morning reported seeing Paul at around 9 a.m., walking quickly and with purpose about halfway down the trail. No other sightings were reported. However, on December 21, 2019, NPS authorities and San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department reported that human remains had been found in a remote and rocky part of Joshua Tree. Officials stated the discovery came about through photographs taken by a drone flyover of the area in November. On December 20, park rangers hiked to the area where they found human skeletal remains and personal belongings. There was no identification with the remains, which appeared to have been there for quite some time. Upon the discovery of these remains, the Miller family prepared themselves for the likelihood that those belonged to Paul. It's been a tough journey. Waiting. Then you hear he's been found. It doesn't make it any easier, Stephanie Miller said in a phone interview. Speculation is that whatever happened that caused his death happened quickly, she said. Possibly a heart attack or heat stroke. He was found in a shaded area and still had water and food. It appeared he had made the hike to 49 Palms Oasis, but was coming back from trail the wrong way. Early in the search for Paul, teams had gotten close enough to where the remains were found that he would have heard and responded when they called out his name, she said, adding, "There is comfort knowing he didn't suffer long. I hated to think he was suffering and we couldn't find him." As of January 19, 2022, time of this recording, Paul Miller's case has no further updates. Another disappearance in Joshua Tree was that of William Michael Iasco. 65-year-old William Michael Iasco, known as Bill, disappeared on June 24, 2010, from Joshua Tree National Park while on a day hike. Bill lived in Marietta, Georgia, along with his fiancée, Mary Winston. Bill was a strong hiker with experience in the wilderness, and he had loved Joshua Tree for a long time and visited the park almost yearly. He was an Army veteran who had served in Vietnam, and he loved to be outdoors. It was on a Wednesday, June 23, 2010, when Bill arrived at LAX from Georgia. He rented a white Chrysler Sebring and drove to Rancho Mirage, California. Bill was staying at a friend's vacant condo on this particular trip. On Thursday, the 24th of June, he headed for Joshua Tree, making a couple of calls along the way. Bill told his fiancée Mary that he planned on leaving the park by 5 p.m. and was going to have dinner that evening at the Pioneer Town restaurant Pappy and Harriet's. Mary believed that Bill was planning to hike to a place called Carey's Castle, which was the first item on the planned itinerary he had left with her. That would have been an ambitious hike for the time of year, though, due to the high temperatures in the lower portion of Joshua Tree. Mary was uncomfortable with the destination choice due to its remoteness and had asked him to reconsider. Bill just laughed it off and gave no indication he was changing his mind. When Bill failed to call Mary that evening, she grew concerned and began making calls. Early the next day, Friday, June 25, Joshua Tree officials had been notified of the incident and were given a description of Bill's vehicle along with his itinerary. By mid-morning, rangers had checked the trailhead for Carey's Castle but found no vehicles. They began checking other areas of the park, but it wasn't until 4:56 p.m. on Saturday, June 26th, that a California Highway Patrol copter spotted Bill's vehicle parked at the Juniper Flats trailhead, which is a regular starting point for visitors wanting to hike to the top of Quail Mountain, a destination also listed on Bill's itinerary. A ranger stayed with Bill's car overnight just in case he came back, but he never showed. There was one known visitor to Juniper Flats trailhead on the day Bill disappeared, a hiker named Greg Mendoza. At the time of his arrival, around 10:20 a.m., there was no one else at the trailhead, but upon his return between 5:30 and 6 p.m., he saw Bill's car. He also saw a single line of fresh boot tracks going up the old Juniper Flats Road. This means that Bill's car had arrived at the parking lot no earlier than 10:20 a.m., leaving at minimum a near 2.5-hour gap from his last phone call. It should have only taken Bill about half that time to reach Juniper Flats Trailhead, so it's unknown where Bill was for the extra hour or so. By this point, an official search and rescue operation began, focusing mainly on Quail Mountain, but also involving other areas that he could have accessed from the Juniper Flats Trailhead. The official search continued until July 5, 2010, 11 days after Bill's disappearance, and involved hundreds of search and rescue personnel. Included in these search and rescue teams from all over Southern California were K-9 units, horseback riders, civilian volunteers, helicopters, and a fixed-wing aircraft. In total, about 770 miles of GPS tracks from ground searchers were logged. Only a red bandana, believed to belong to Bill, was found on the ridge near Quail Mountain throughout all these efforts. The unofficial search continued on despite the lack of evidence. Even with many people being involved after the official search ended, as of this recording, in January of 2022, Bill Iasco remains missing, and there have been no further updates. Lauren L. Cho, disappeared on June 28, 2021, from the area between Morongo and Yucca Valleys in California. Lauren grew up in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, and went by the nickname L. She studied music education at Westminster Choir College and became a high school music teacher. However, Elle quit her teaching job in the winter of 2020. She then joined her friend Cody Orrell on a road trip cross-country. She joined this trip with the intention of running a food truck once they arrived at their final destination, Bombay Beach, California. By June 2021, Elle was working as the private chef for an Airbnb property called The Hole, owned by Tao Ruspoli. The property is located between Yucca and Morongo Valleys outside of Joshua Tree National Park. On June 28, 2021, Elle took off on her own after a heated argument ensued between she and her friend Cody. The housekeeper at the Airbnb property claimed that both Elle and Cody had been drinking since early in the day, and Elle had become aggravated when Cody refused to let her drive away, so she took off on foot, leaving her phone and taking no food or water. This was around 3 in the afternoon. Cody called the sheriff's office around 5:13 p.m. when his initial search for Elle, which included some of their other friends, came up empty. They didn't find so much as a single footprint. Elle was last seen wearing a yellow t-shirt and blue jean shorts when she walked away from where she was staying. Cody thought she might have gotten into a vehicle with someone, considering there were no tracks, and Elle was supposedly planning on meeting an unknown individual later in the day anyway, although this theory was never confirmed. Law enforcement officials, as well as search and rescue teams, combed the area on foot and included K-9 rescue teams and a fixed-wing aircraft which was used to conduct aerial searches. The Morongo Basin Sheriff's Station told reporters that their helicopter, along with members of the search and rescue unit, had been searching for Elle since her disappearance. However, they believe that Elle was voluntarily missing due to no evidence of foul play. The Specialized Investigation Divisions of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department began assisting in the search for Elle in September of 2021. However, this was a good 3 months after her disappearance. Despite these efforts, no evidence of her whereabouts came to light. Cody and some of Elle's other friends tried bringing awareness to her disappearance by using social media platforms. They also posted flyers all around the Bombay Beach area, but nothing came of it. No one came forward claiming to have seen Elle. The search continued until October 9, 2021, when investigators found human remains in the rugged terrain of Yucca Valley. On October 28th of 2021, it was confirmed that the remains found did indeed belong to Elle. The cause and manner of her passing have not been released. As of this recording in January of 2022, Lauren Cho's case has no further updates. Next, that brings us to the disappearance of Patrick Lynn Wells. 38-year-old Patrick Wells disappeared on June 5, 2021 from Joshua Tree National Park. Park spokesperson Jenny Alberink stated that Patrick was last seen on June 5th when he left to drive to his dad's house. Patrick was from 29 Palms and he was heading to Riverside. He never made it to his destination and was officially reported missing on June 10th. He's described as a Caucasian male, 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighing about 197 pounds. He has brown hair and brown eyes, as well as a dragon and a United States Marine Corps insignia tattoo on his arms. It is believed he was wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and either tennis shoes or black work boots at the time of his disappearance. Park officials found Patrick's truck in the Indian Cove parking lot of the Rattlesnake Canyon area on the day he was reported missing. Joshua Tree National Park began investigating and organized a search. The efforts continued until the search was halted June 12, 2021, on discovery of human remains in a hiking area of Joshua Tree. Soon after, the coroner confirmed the remains belonged to Patrick, though no cause of his passing was listed. As of January 19, 2021, the date of this recording, there have been no further updates on the Patrick Wells case. Next, we have Erica Ashley Lloyd. 37-year-old Erica Lloyd was last seen on June 14, 2020, at her home in Walnut Creek, San Bernardino County, California. She had told her family she was going on a camping trip to Joshua Tree National Park. Erica's mom, Ruth, said she was just trying to make ends meet, like so many others during the pandemic. Erica owned a salon called Bloom in Alamo, California, but when the mandatory closures and other restrictions came about due to the pandemic, Erica's salon closed down and didn't reopen. The trip to Joshua Tree was to be a chance for her to get away from all the negativity for a little while. Erica is described as 5 foot 3 inches tall, 125 pounds, and has brown hair and blue eyes. According to Erica's roommate, she said she was planning to meet other people at Joshua Tree. However, the identities of those people she was supposedly planning to meet are still a mystery, and it's unclear if she did indeed meet up with anyone after leaving home on June 14. When Erica didn't return and couldn't be reached, her family reported her missing on June 17. Authorities found Erica's car, a black 2006 Honda Accord, abandoned on Shelton Road north of State Route 62, just east of the 29 Palms area. Both the front and rear windshields were broken, and the car appeared to be involved in a sand berm accident, which mangled the K-frame of the car and deployed the airbag. Even so, California Highway Patrol Officer Casey Simmons said investigators found no evidence on the roadway consistent with a traffic accident. Some of Erica's items were found in the car, but there was no sign of her whereabouts. The police stated there was no indication of foul play up until the car was found. According to Erica's sister-in-law, Jenna, Erica was very stressed about the pandemic and the quarantine, and she was going camping for a few days to sort of unplug, despite the fact that she was not an experienced camper. The most accurate information about Erica's disappearance can be found on the Bring Erica Home Facebook page. The following is an excerpt from a comment written by Erica's mom on that page. There have been many stories of Erica from various podcasts and in the forum world, which are filled with a lot of opinions, theories, and conjectures. The information that they provide almost never comes from the police investigators handling Erica's case to verify or corroborate their info. We know that Erica was not in a good state of mind and decided to take this trip to Joshua Tree Park to clear her head. There's been no indication of foul play up to when her car was found on Shelton Road, broken down, despite what others may say or think. We received 6 sightings of apparently homeless or transient women fitting Erica's description in the high desert area, but none of them turned out to be her. Some of what was done to find Erica: there were search teams from the sheriff's department that continued to search further and further out from the location of her car. Doug Billings, an expert at mapping and a cave diver, has extensive knowledge of mines in the area. He's done numerous searches with the help of his friends. Family members and other groups have aided in the searching. Banners and a billboard were placed in strategic locations in the Wonder Valley area, asking if anyone helped Erica on June 16th. Erica's aunts have sent out hundreds of flyers to homeless shelters, hospitals, and food banks to areas such as 29 Palms, Joshua Tree, Yucca Valley, Palm Springs, Desert Springs, Indio, Coachella, Riverside, Morongo Basin, Ontario, Los Angeles, San Diego, Venice Beach, and more. Erica's mom further states, We're continuing to look at offbeat communes like Slab City and Amboy. Both police investigators from San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and Walnut Creek Police Department are still actively investigating the case. The case remained active after Erica's disappearance, with no real leads until January of 2021. In February of 2021, Erica's brother posted to the Facebook page saying, "As the brother of Erica Lloyd, I would like to address the public on behalf of our family." On January 31st, 2021, human remains were discovered by hikers in the vicinity of Danby Road and Amboy Road in Wonder Valley, California. It is with a heavy heart to announce that these remains have been identified by San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department as my sister, Erica. There is no easy way for me to tell you all this, and there's no easy way for any of us to receive it. My wish is that we can all lean in a little closer, hold each other up, and remind each other more often that we're here for one another with open arms and endless love. It's what she would have wanted. It's the spirit of who she was. On May 12, 2021, Erica's family shared another post on the Bring Erica Home Facebook page. Quoting here, "The family of Erica Lloyd would like to give an update. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department Special Investigative Unit has notified us they are no longer handling Erica's case. After reviewing the extensive investigation done on Erica's disappearance, they have not found any indication of foul play. Thus, Erica's case will be turned back over to the Morongo Basin Station investigators for any remaining follow-up and information. From everything the investigators learned, and everything we found out from our first trip to California in June to our last trip in February, all indications appeared Erica suffered a sudden mental breakdown starting about a week before she disappeared into the desert. During that last week, Erica had communicated with various family members, friends, co-workers, and some clients. The common thread from all of them referring to Erica was something was off and out of place, but they could not put their finger on it. One co-worker was so concerned about Erica on June 10th, 6 days before she went missing, that she dropped by Erica's apartment to check up on her and spent a couple of hours talking to her. It was the following day when Erica took off on her road trip. It has been hard to understand how Erica, who was a free spirit, hardworking, and an independent, loving mom, could suffer a sudden mental psychotic breakdown. Psychosis means losing touch with reality, as often associated with various serious mental illnesses. If stress becomes too overwhelming, anyone may experience these symptoms triggering a breakdown. Erica was dealing with the lockdown, learning to take care of her son in the new stay-in-place world, a forced shutdown of her thriving Bloom hair studio in Alamo, California, losing personal contact with the clients whose weddings and proms were canceled, and trying to make some sense to understand where our society was going. This was overwhelming to her and pushed her over the edge and into a break. Erica was no longer in control, and the voices she heard had taken over her thoughts. As a family, we are heartbroken over losing our Erica. It is difficult to understand what struggles her mind was going through the last week of her life. We know there were possibly missed opportunities to stop and help Erica before she slipped away and wandered out into the desert. At this point, it's unknown if any person or persons could have made a difference in stopping or helping her. We accept what happened to Erica and know she was in the storm of her life. Joshua Tree National Park has a mystical appeal and is said to be located on a powerful energy vortex, and Erica was drawn to this place. Unfortunately, as beautiful as the desert is, the heat is brutal and harsh during the day and cold at night. We know that prior and during this time, Erica was seeking the Lord, looking for peace and happiness in her life. While working with the investigators and searchers, early on we knew there were three main possibilities of what could have happened to Erica. All were closely looked at, but sadly on June 16, 2020, Erica was running, it was hot, she was scared, dehydrated, and not in touch with reality. She wandered into the desert and succumbed to the elements. We know Erica is at peace now. Because of Erica's faith in God, He has a bigger plan for her which gives us comfort. This is our hope. The Lord Jesus Christ brought Erica home. End quote. Any updates that the family wishes to share in the future will be posted on the Facebook page titled Bring Erica Home. Now, on a lighter note, not everybody that goes missing in Joshua Tree perishes. Here are some amazing true stories of survival. Claire Nelson. 36-year-old Claire Nelson nearly died alone in the desert in May of 2018. Claire, originally from New Zealand, was visiting friends who lived near Joshua Tree National Park, where she was to house sit for them while they left for vacation. During her stay, Claire planned on adventuring through the desert and connecting with nature. Claire was experienced in the outdoors, and she was a fiercely independent person, so much so that she had been pushing people away for some time. But she loved exploring and also sharing her travel experiences online. She was a freelance travel writer at the time of the Joshua Tree visit that changed her life forever. After her friends left for their journey to Scotland, Claire was on to her own adventures. She left for a day hike to Joshua Tree, planning to explore the Lost Palms Oasis Trail. However, Claire hadn't told anybody specifically where she was going, only that she planned on exploring inside Joshua Tree. It started out as a day like any other. Claire packed a day bag with a spare t-shirt, several liters of water, and a meager lunch: a hard-boiled egg, a bagel, and a chocolate bar. She climbed up, then began testing her footing. Everything seemed okay until her foot started slipping and she became unsteady. She lost her balance completely and went crashing over 26 feet down into a clearing not much bigger than she was, shattering her pelvis in the process. The fall knocked the breath out of her, and the pain was excruciating and unrelenting. Claire recalled, "I'd landed amongst these large boulders, and I couldn't move. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't stand up. It was indescribably painful." Unable to move, Claire immediately tried using her cell phone to call for help, but she had no service. The predicament she was in was life-threatening, indeed. She was all alone in the desert with a shattered pelvis, barely enough water for a day and a half, and contending with the California desert heat, as well as unusually high numbers of coyote, rattlesnakes, and other dangers. "I felt more vulnerable than I could ever have imagined being in my life," Claire said of the ordeal. She immediately began recording videos of herself, messages to friends and family, as well as documentation of her situation. Claire occasionally tried to move, especially to find shade, but when she tried, there was a crunching, clicking sound coming from her pelvic region, along with searing, mind-numbing pain. She couldn't budge. She was ashamed to admit it, but this hike was not the first time she'd left for an adventure without telling someone of her plans. "I know better. I know the rules. Always tell someone where you're going," said Claire, who wrote about her experience in her book, Things I Learned from Falling. The reality of her situation set in, and Claire really didn't want to spend the night alone on the desert floor, but she had no other option. Nobody knew to check in with her or to expect her back at a certain time. The fact that she might die out there alone was not lost on Claire. She kept recording videos, then turning her phone and digital camera off to conserve the battery life. She made herself eat the hard-boiled egg since it would go bad anyway, and she knew she needed the protein if she was going to survive this tragedy. Her determination and will to live kicked in, however, and Claire prepared herself for the nighttime. After nightfall, there were bats flying around, and Claire hoped they weren't the kind that liked to bite people. Her imagination went wild, and she was sure at times that she was seeing snakes coming out of the rocks, though in reality, snakes rarely come out at night. Thankfully, she survived until morning. One night in the desert, alone and injured, down. Only 2 more to go. Claire tried her best to protect herself from the elements. She used a stick to rub sunscreen on her legs. The sun is unforgiving during the desert summers and can quickly do significant damage to her skin, as well as dehydrate us even faster. She rationed what was left of her food and water as long as she could, but neither lasted very long. The lack of water grew unbearable. Dehydration is a god-awful business, Claire wrote in her book. It starts in the mouth, the initial pang of craving quite subtle and easy to ignore, but the signals get more insistent. Over time, your tongue becomes increasingly dry and scratchy, thickening like a woolen mitten, sticking against the sides of your mouth like Velcro. From there, you feel it in your head. A slowly increasing pressure throbs inside your skull as if your brain is shrinking in on itself, withering like a piece of dried fruit. She fantasized about Diet Coke and other cold refreshments, even willing them to be real. Claire had no choice once her water ran out. She even urinated in a bottle and drank it for hydration. While unpleasant, at least it helped keep her alive. She used the park map, the bandana, and the plastic bag, which she attached to a stick, to cover herself and block out the sun. Claire continued applying sunscreen, recycling her urine, and making videos, but there was nothing else she could do. She was trapped in the middle of the desert with no way of knowing whether anyone was searching for her. She battled the scorching heat on the second day and dreaded nightfall. She didn't want to spend another night alone in the desert. Naturally, she hadn't slept, and delirium was setting in. She made it through the night with sheer willpower and determination. On the third day, Claire's mind was really playing tricks on her. She thought she heard helicopters and ambulances, but it was all in her head. She could see birds of prey circling overhead, waiting for her to die so they could grab an easy meal. However, after a couple of days of social media silence, the friends Claire was house-sitting for grew concerned. It wasn't like her not to post, especially when she was somewhere beautiful like Joshua Tree. They contacted friends from the area and had them go to the house to check for Claire. When they didn't see her car or find her at the home, Claire was reported missing. Joshua Tree National Park officials found her car, and there were at least 2 days of chalk marks, which are used to tell whether or not a vehicle has been moved. It was clear that Claire had left the car and not come back for quite some time. A search and rescue mission was launched, the searchers starting where her car was found and working outwards. They made several rounds in a helicopter near where Claire had fallen, but they didn't find her at first. After all, she was trapped between large boulders where it was difficult to see. They called out over the helicopter's PA system, "We are looking for a missing hiker. If you can hear us, please make movement." The search crew didn't know it, but Claire was screaming for help as she heard the helicopter, and it was real this time. She tied the plastic bag on the end of her stick with a hair tie and began waving it frantically. It wasn't until their last and final sweep of the area that they saw, tiny and obscure, a plastic grocery bag waving back and forth. They called out that they could see her and told her that help was on the way. Due to the terrain, the helicopter couldn't land in the area, so rescuers had to hike into where she was at to save her. Claire knew at that point that she was going to be okay. After 3 nights and 4 days alone in the desert, Claire was rushed to a hospital where she received emergency surgery. Thankfully, she made it through okay and spent the next several months recuperating. She had to do extensive rehabilitation and spend some time in a wheelchair before she was able to learn to walk again. During her time in that awful situation, Claire realized that she had been pushing people away, and although she was connecting with others in social media, there was a lack of true human connection in her life. She made the decision that if she lived through this ordeal, she was going to do better, for herself and for others. Claire triumphantly returned to Joshua Tree a year later with friends and finally finished the hike she had started that almost ended her life. Today, Claire is thankful to be alive, and she vowed to never forget what happened to her and to use it as motivation. Her book, Things I Learned from Falling, can be found on Amazon. Next up in our survivors, Holly Jochum. 32-year-old Holly Jochum was planning a camping trip on December 27, 2020, to Big Bear Campground in California. She packed her things and loaded her 2 dogs into her RV. As she drove to Big Bear, she was excited for the trip, but unfortunately, when she arrived, she found the campsite was closed. Around 4:45 p.m. that day, she contacted family and told them about a change in plans. She was going to drive an hour and 15 minutes away and camp in the desert at Joshua Tree instead, and said she'd call when she arrived. But by 7:30 that evening, Holly's phone was off or otherwise unreachable, and her family hadn't heard from her. They were rightfully concerned and contacted the authorities. They filed a missing person report and began reaching out on social media for help locating Holly. Her sister Lori made a post asking for anyone who might have seen Holly to please come forward. Holly had randomly selected a campsite at Joshua Tree from her phone. Although she was an experienced camper, the site she chose was unfamiliar to her. On the way to the site, the terrain had become difficult, and she decided to camp out in a secluded area until the next day. The night came and went, and the next morning, Holly woke to find 2 feet of snow had fallen through the night. Holly wrote about the ordeal. By Tuesday, there was nearly 2 feet of very fine fresh powder, and I was stuck. There was also no cell service where she had parked, so she and her 2 dogs were truly out there alone. For 3 days, Holly and the dogs camped out, waiting for the snow to melt, but that never happened. Holly decided she had to do something. Friday morning, she planned on hiking back down the mountain, at least until she had cell service. The snow was too deep for her dogs, so she loaded them into 2 separate backpacks and began the 6-mile hike back down. Eventually, she reached a place that had phone service, and she called in her location to her mom and the authorities. Search teams had been looking for her, and news of her safety was cause for celebration. Holly met the sheriff at the bottom of the mountain, who drove her to Cabazon, where she met with her mother. Thankfully, neither Holly nor her dogs were harmed during their time stuck on the mountain, and they had a happy ending, unlike so many others who go missing. Holly wrote, "I'm so thankful for everyone who was involved in searching for me, for everyone who shared the missing persons post, and mostly for my family, who tried with every ounce they had to bring me back." The experience is sure to remind Holly, as well as the rest of us, of the dangers of the wilderness and just how quickly things can change when you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. And our last tale of survival, Robert Ringo. 67-year-old Robert Ringo was on a day hike one Thursday in June of 2020 near Quail Mountain in Joshua Tree National Park when tragedy struck. Robert had gotten ready that morning with nothing out of the ordinary. He drove to Joshua Tree and, once parked, shared his location with his son, something he always did. He brought along 2 liters of water for the hike, but not much more in the way of supplies. The temperatures are in the high 90s. The desert heat was sweltering. Robert is an avid hiker and used to these conditions, so he wasn't worried, especially since he was only planning a short hike. He felt good starting out on his walk, but a ways into the hike, while admiring the views and enjoying the outdoors, Robert somehow lost his footing and fell to the ground, breaking his left femur. The area he was in had no cell service, so he was stranded after his fall. "I started trying to at least turn over, and when I did," he said, "it was just unbelievable pain." Robert began recording himself since he had no way of signaling for help. His cries for help can be heard in the videos shared with news media. Robert knew his 2 liters of water wouldn't last for long. He tried to at least get himself onto his back and finally managed. After some time lying there, he knew he had to eat something to keep his energy up. "I somehow scooted up this place, ate some juniper berries, and saw what I thought might be flowers, but they were all dry, so I wasn't going to eat them," he said. He continued recording videos and trying to conserve water. "This is the first time I've experienced no saliva," he said in one of the videos he took. He knew if he could just hold on long enough, someone would be looking for him. He mentions having a confidence and a faith that he was going to survive. The next day, Friday, Robert's son Ryan alerted officials of his father's missing status. He saw on his phone that his dad's last known location was Joshua Tree. The search and rescue efforts began searching in earnest for Robert, knowing the summer heat is dangerous to be in with only limited water supply. Time was of the essence. Rescue teams searched for hours, but to no avail. It wasn't until Saturday morning, nearly 2 days after Robert had taken his fall, that he finally heard a rescue copter. The Joshua Tree search and rescue team retrieved Robert and brought him to the Desert Regional Medical Center. Robert had emergency surgery on his leg and later made a full recovery. In closing, it's things like we've covered in this video that continue to happen daily, with our national parks being hotspots for all manner of strange occurrences. Some of them natural, some of them bordering on the supernatural and beyond. While there could be any number of things or combination of things to blame for these cases, one thing is certain. We can never be sure something won't happen to us. It's recommended that everyone who plans on being within our national parks or out in the wilderness in general carry a personal locator beacon at all times. This beacon transmits a distress signal with its location when activated. So what do you think is happening in Joshua Tree? Let us know in the comments section. And if we've earned your subscription, we appreciate it. Please hit the red button and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on any new content or case updates. I look forward to your comments, but ask that you please keep them friendly and respectful. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you just a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.